Okay, Council, this is City Council regular meeting, and it is Tuesday, September 15th, 2020. And some of us are at City Hall, everybody else is virtualed in. Meeting accessibility. Pursuant to the Governor's Emergency Proclamation 20-25, the city is unable to provide an in-person location for the public to listen to the virtual City Council meeting this evening. Meetings are still accessible to the public, and public comment is able to be submitted. To view live, city website www.sammamish.us/TV21. The city YouTube and the Comcast channel 21 within the Sammamish only. To view later, meeting videos are available the day after the meeting. Again, the city website, www.sammamish.us/TV21. Our YouTube and Comcast channel 21 within Sammamish only. Mike, will you call the order?
Mayor Karen Moran.
Present.
Deputy Mayor Christy Malchow.
Present.
Councilmember Ken Gamblin.
Present.
Councilmember Jason Ritchie.
Here.
Councilmember Chris Ross.
Present.
Councilmember Pamela Stewart. We didn't hear you, Pam. She's gesturing that she is here. And Councilmember Kent Treen.
Present.
Karen, we can't hear anything on our end. I don't know if you guys can.
Okay.
No audio.
Can you hear me now?
Thank you. Now we can, yeah.
Okay, so how about Councilmember Ross, you want to lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to its republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next up is the approval of the agenda. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, 7-0. Next up is a report from our emergency management, COVID-19, our emergency manager. Is Andrew on the line?
Yes, Mayor. Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Wonderful. My name is Andrew Stevens. I'm the emergency manager with Eastside Fire and Rescue. So good evening, Mayor, council members, city manager. Thank you again for allowing me the opportunity to provide another brief situational update on COVID-19 and the other current hazards facing the city. We are in the middle of Emergency Preparedness Month, so tonight I will also touch on the impending flu season, the impact of wildfire smoke on Sammamish, and the concerns of residents on evacuation routes and preparedness for wildfires in the light of the historic events happening all across the western United States. It's important that our city's resiliency continues to strengthen through the challenges we face. And I want the community to know we are paying close attention, working hard for them, and that we hear those concerns. So firstly, I'm going to start by addressing COVID-19. This pandemic, which has taken nearly 200,000 American lives in under 7 months. I sadly report that since my last update, Sammamish has lost another life due to COVID. Each life lost is heartbreaking, especially for their loved ones. We've also seen 26 new positive cases in the last 14 days. The better news is that the total cases across the city and the county appear to be trending downward again. I believe this is because we have taken a clear, firm, and measurable actions to preserve the wellness of our residents, and that we've been able to keep our numbers relatively low compared to other Washington cities. But in order for us to maintain those low numbers of the downward trend, we must stay vigilant. The risk of falling prey to compassion fatigue will undoubtedly result in more positive cases and more lives lost. Just because we occasionally hit low numbers does not mean that we can relax health and safety protocols as a city government or as individual community members. We must turn the low trends into stable factors in the data, which takes continued commitment to social distancing, the wearing of PPE, limiting outings, social interactions, and so forth. So I urge residents to keep others in mind when deciding if to downgrade their personal safety or family measures. And thank you to all compliant community members who are making the health and safety of themselves and our community a top priority. Your dedication is quite literally a matter of life or death for some. So this brings me to flu season and the weather changes which could impact the community as far as COVID-19 is concerned. If you can get a flu shot, it's time to start booking your appointments with your doctor to do so. While influenza and COVID-19 are very distinct illnesses, with COVID-19 being far deadlier, having more unpredictable symptoms, higher fatality rate, and sometimes a very prolonged recovery, they both create systematic vulnerabilities to residents in our community. Ultimately, we want to avoid outbreaks of both, especially co-infections. And although inclement weather and colder weather may drive you inside, into restaurants, or into social gathering situations, we continue to encourage the community to follow the social distancing guidelines set forth by public health experts and refrain from indoor socializing, especially in groups outside of your family. Second, I'd like to address the smoke surge we've collectively experienced throughout most of the state and of the whole entire West Coast of America. Now, these conditions are dangerous, so please heed all recommendations to stay indoors. And if you must be outside, continue wearing your masks as it is helpful in this public health incident as well. Should driving become precarious, use your hazards until you get to a safe spot and pull over. While rain will eventually come and be a reprieve to our forests and wildlife, it will not clean the air out. Atmospheric movement is what is needed to clear our air, and that is not expected until possibly later in the week. Although meteorological modeling changes rapidly, please do not assume the moment you see blue skies that the air is safe. Follow the city and county updates as well as your local news for updates on air quality. If you have heart or pulmonary conditions, please take extra precautions as directed by your physician. Thirdly, I've heard concerns of residents about evacuation routes and disaster preparedness, and I want you to know that I'm listening and responding. In addition to the robust emergency preparedness guide and resources hosted on the city website, the Sammamish City Council recently adopted the King County Regional 2020 Hazard Mitigation Plan and accompanying City of Sammamish Jurisdictional Annex. That detailed plan can be reviewed in the July 21st Council agenda. It outlines mitigation actions that the city is taking, including all hazards transportation planning, which involves evacuation route studying and mapping. The few points of egress from our community could be further hindered based on the types of emergency we're facing, whether it's a wildfire, winter storms, or severe wind. This is especially concerning for the life and safety of evacuees. So I urge all residents, at a minimum, to know your nearest egress points in the direction from your home and possibly try different routes. In the interim of having the study completed, which is yet to begin until next year's budget is solidified, I'll be creating a preliminary evacuation map and evacuation preparedness plan for the community. Essentially, with such limited routes, it's imperative for our community. It's imperative our community is truly prepared to evacuate when asked, and they know what to do if asked. Providing a checklist to residents will help them prepare them as a crucial part of having the effective evacuations in disaster and creating, and mitigating unnecessary traffic. I'll be coordinating with my boss over at Eastside Fire and Rescue, as well as city staff, to have this approved and disseminated to the public as soon as possible on social media, in the email newsletter, and in the mailed newsletter at a minimum. The dense smoke is also a harsh reminder of the ever-increasing risk of wildfires across the state and even in Western Washington. This is one of the reasons why I recently wrote a grant pursuing federal funding to support the development of community wildfire protection plans across all of Eastside Fire Rescue service areas. These plans will be crucial in developing a strategy for how we manage these growing risks of wildfires in the wildland-urban interface across the region, and how we educate our residents and implement mitigating actions that reduce risk and future vulnerability. So thank you all for your time and the attention to these important health and safety matters. Your support is crucial in my department being effective for our community. I'm available to now answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Andrew. That was a great report. Council, do we have any questions for Andrew? Councilmember Gamblin.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrew. Hey, you mentioned that you would hope everybody would know their evacuation route, and my initial thought was we need to put an evacuation route map out there. You immediately answered my question, so thank you very much. I'm wondering if there's a way that to integrate a traffic app into a evacuation plan. Now, I know that when an evacuation may be necessary, we may also have problems with infrastructure on getting our internet or our ability to get to that type of app. But have you thought about integrating that so that people can see whether their planned evacuation route is full and maybe have an alternate?
Yeah, when we begin the full evacuation planning initiative, we're going to be looking at hopefully a lot of the traffic modeling data that the city's already been able to get over the last few years. Since we have such limited egress routes off of the plateau, it really becomes a plan about communicating that risk, communicating where they need to go, because say, for example, in a wildfire situation, their normal route possibly to the south may be entirely blocked. The fire could be coming from the south or could be coming from the north. So we need to be able to communicate that risk of where to go, whether it's phased evacuations to get the people at risk most off the plateau first, so they're not stuck in traffic. You saw that in Paradise when people that were even further away from, the fire were still on the road evacuating, and then the people closer to the fire could not get off. So those are all, there's a lot of points to consider. So we need to look at really telling people what to do, how they need to get prepared, building that trust and confidence in the system. So if we do say it's time to go, they go. They don't look for reassurance. They don't look for additional opinions on whether the risk is really there or not. And that's really what the process entails.
You got it. Thank you. And thanks for the work, Andrew. Knowing that we're looking at some of these emergency management tasks really makes me feel better. So thanks for your work.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, next I have Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, Andrew, thank you for your report. I do have a question. Having looked at the county's dashboard and the information they have there, which allows us to look at our own jurisdiction, and I admit I did not look at neighboring jurisdictions, and that's kind of my question. So I was kind of surprised to find out that our highest COVID numbers are in the 10 to 19 and the 19 to 29 age brackets. That's where most of our COVID cases are right now. And I wondered if that is like trending across the county or if we're an anomaly.
I'm going to have to verify that, Deputy Mayor. I know that was a trend that I started looking at back in August when it was starting to get hot, when we really started to see a lot of the social gatherings out. Kids were out of school and they were looking for things to do. And so I brought that up on one of my reports that, yes, this adolescent group, while maybe not at the highest vulnerability of possibly dying or long-term consequences from COVID, you were seeing the greatest number of positives, and those can be super spreaders, because they're hanging out and they're going back to family members or grandma and grandpa's house. So I think that was a really important step that you guys did to limit some of the actions in Pine Lake and some of the other public facilities. I will look at Redmond and Issaquah, Bellevue, and get back with you, though.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious, but I think as a side note, I'm not sure we know what the long-term consequences are. I think we're just now kind of uncovering some of these, I wouldn't even dub them long-term at this point. We're months out from the inception of the virus being here, but I think that could be potentially something that we'll find out in the future, is there could be long-term consequences.
Absolutely. Even younger groups that are getting it are seeing that fight possibly, last for months, severe respiratory distress, and, it really does affect a lot of things. And it has been fatal to several younger populations. It is not just over 60 crowd when this thing came out a month ago. It is all age groups.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, is there anybody else with any questions? Okay, great job, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, next up is public comment. How many? We have two. Wow, okay, public comment. Pursuant to the Governor's Emergency Proclamation 20-25, the city is unable to provide an in-person location for the public to listen to the virtual city council meeting this evening. Meetings are still accessible to the public, and public comment is able to be submitted. Written comment. Written public comment will be accepted until 5 p.m. on the day of the meeting. Submit your written public comment via email to the city clerk at lhatchie@sammamish.us and the city council at citycouncil@sammamish.us. Verbal comment. Up to 3 minutes of verbal comment may be provided per person live during the meeting. Call the following number and input the access code when prompted by 6:30 the day of the meeting. The phone number 1-571-317-3122. The access code 929-348-197. Once you have joined, you will be placed on mute. The meeting operator will unmute you when it is your turn to comment. You will hear an automated voice say unmuted when that occurs, and the operator will ask you to begin your comment. Mr. Sugg.
Thank you, Mayor. I see we have two people who have called in to provide comment this evening. I will unmute callers in the order in which they join the meeting. When it is your turn to speak, as the Mayor mentioned, you will hear an automated voice say unmuted. Please note, if you would like to speak on one or both of the public hearings, please state which ones when you are unmuted. So item number 8 will be Tent City, and item number 9 is unsolicited literature. I will place you back on hold and return to you when the council reaches that hearing if you'd like to speak on one. Okay, let's now go ahead and unmute our first caller. Caller number 1, are you calling for the public comment or for one of the public hearings?
Public comment.
Public comment. All right, great. Please state your name and the city you live in for the record, and then you may begin your comment.
For the record, Romero Valderrama from Sammamish. According to the U.S. Treasury, the CARES Act provides fast and direct economic assistance for American workers, families, and small businesses to preserve jobs for our industries. The CARES Act requires the payments cover expenses that are necessary expenditures incurred due to the public health emergency with respect to COVID. Now we see today the council plan to withhold this money and running it through EFER. Quote, the council may then allocate the freed up funds as they wish without the constraints put on the use of the federal funds, close quotes. This goes directly against the intended fast and direct economic assistance for our citizens. If it is not illegal, it certainly raises questions of ethics of this council and their callous disregard for the citizens and businesses in our community suffering. How is EFER a necessary expenditure incurred due to public health emergency if you plan to get the funds back? This could be an initial attempt to use the term others in the city have used to launder the money to the general fund to cover the massive new increased expenses estimated to be in the millions of dollars to cover the council's obsession of manipulating the now invalidated, error-prone, and manipulated concurrency standard and reduce individual property land use to stop growth. that is explicitly prohibited by the state's Growth Management Act. To date, according to the Sammamish Independent, Sammamish citizens have received $43,000 on basic needs assistance and $322,000 to help small businesses from impacts of the pandemic. This means of the original funds, $1.57 million remains of the original to be distributed, plus the additional $966,000 for the total of $2.9 million that the city received. By comparison, our neighbors have prioritized the CARES Act as it was intended to help. The city of Issaquah received $1.13 million in aid, already allocated $800,000. Redmond, which was eligible for $1.98 million, allocated $1.97 million for small businesses and human services. City of North Bend also has spent 90% of its available funds from CARES Act so far. As a citizen of Sammamish and taxpayer, I question the motives and fiscal responsibility of this council. If the council is unable and unwilling to quickly disperse the funds as required to my fellow citizens in need of food, housing, and other assistance as cited in the law, it should immediately return the funds to the Treasury. Council needs to be fiscally responsible and sensitive to the needs of our citizens in their plight during this pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you as always. Who's our next caller?
Yes, I will go ahead and unmute our second caller. Caller number 2, are you calling in tonight for public comment or for one of the public hearings?
Both. I'd like to give general public comment and then also speak to item 9 when the public hearing is up.
And item 9, great. So for public comment, please state your name and the city you live in for the record, and then you may begin.
My name is Mary Wichter. I live in the city of Sammamish. I've been here 20 years. I've also been speaking at city council meetings for about 6 years now. For regular public comment, I am speaking about public comment on public comment. Tonight you have council revisions to the rules of procedure for city council. That's item number 11 under new business. It starts on page 162. The first thing is there's a thing on staff time for media request interviews. I'm a little bit concerned about that because I know our city runs on an extremely lean staff compared to other municipalities, and I don't know if there needs to be that or a limit on it, because I can't see them spending all their time with people responding to social media and other types of interviews. So I'm just a little bit concerned about that with regard to use of staff time and what council members can and need to say on social media. The second thing is the strongest thing I'm calling about. It's section 4.4.2 on page 175 of 190 in the packet. It's a modified thing for public comment at study sessions. When I started speaking at city council meetings with the former councils, there were 3 meetings per month. And then when they didn't have enough time to get all their work done, they changed it to 4. When they did go up to 4 meetings per month, they made one the first Monday, and then you could give public comment on the next Tuesday. But there has always been the opportunity to give public comment for 3 minutes, whether it's a city council regular meeting, a special meeting, or a study session. And I actually like the change that you guys were going to be using, where you put the study session comments at the end, because that way the public can hear what's being presented, the discussions learn, and then give input to it at the end. So I'm particularly upset that it looks like you're changing and making it so there wouldn't really be public comment at all. So that would only give 2 opportunities. I'm okay with the change that you made, that study sessions you have to comment on that topic. I was okay with that. So I would like to suggest that for study session public comment, the red strikeout be kept. At least a second sentence public comment at a study session shall be limited to items included on the study session agenda, and then say it could be up for a period of 30 minutes. That will allow 10 people to talk. I doubt that you would have that many unless it's a really hot topic in which you should be having comment anyway, rather than just leaving it to the presiding officer. So I guess in order to give transparency for people to learn about what happens at a study session, to learn the materials, to hear council things. The public really should be allowed to give input. Sometimes we have comments, sometimes we have questions, sometimes we have other experiences or research data, and I really feel like it's worth the 3 minutes that each person is given. So thank you, and then I'll stay on the line to speak again at the public hearing.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next up, Council, we have got the consent calendar.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any comment? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor of the consent calendar, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. Don't know what that is. Okay, consent calendar passes 7-0. Next up, we've got presentations and proclamations. The first up is the proclamation on Diaper Needs Awareness Week, and that will be read by Councilmember Gamblin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Sammamish, Washington, proclamation. Whereas diaper need, the condition of not having a sufficient supply of clean diapers to ensure that infants and toddlers are clean, healthy, and dry, can adversely affect the health and welfare of infants, toddlers, and their families. And whereas national surveys report that 1 in 3 mothers experiencing diaper need at some time while their children are less than 3 years of age, and 48% of families delay changing a diaper to extend their supply. And whereas the average infant or toddler requires an average of 50 diaper changes per week over 3 years. And whereas diapers cannot be bought with food stamps or WIC vouchers. Therefore, obtaining a sufficient supply of diapers can cause economic hardship to families. And whereas a supply of diapers is generally an eligibility requirement for infant and toddlers to participate in child care programs and quality early education programs. And whereas the people of Sammamish recognize that addressing diaper need can lead to economic opportunity for the state's low-income families and can lead to improved health for families and their communities. And whereas Sammamish is proud to support community organizations that recognize the importance of diapers in helping provide economic stability for families and distribute diapers to poor families through various channels. Now and therefore, Mayor Karen Moran, on behalf of the Sammamish Council, does hereby proclaim the week of September 21st through September 27th, 2020, as Diaper Need Awareness Week in the city of Sammamish, and encourage the citizens of Sammamish to donate generously to diaper banks, diaper drives, and those organizations that distribute diapers to families in need to help alleviate diaper need in Sammamish and environs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Next up, we have got a proclamation on National Substance Abuse Awareness Month, and that will be read by Councilmember Ritchie.
Thank you. Proclamation for National Substance Abuse Prevention Month. Whereas many of our young people do not develop the skills needed to productively go through adolescence substance-free, and whereas substance use can and does negatively impact the development and potential for our youth to succeed, and whereas the substance use prevention has a greater impact than later intervention by changing a child's early life path away from maladaptive solutions and towards positive behaviors and productivity. And whereas substance use prevention is extremely cost-effective model in comparison with later high utilization interventions. In general terms, a savings of up to $10 or more for every dollar spent on effective programming. And whereas the benefits of increasing productive factors while reducing risk factors and engaging social emotional learning provides a universal benefit for all of our youth. And whereas by stopping the drug use before it starts, we can prevent the disease of addiction and create stronger neighborhoods in our community. Now, therefore, I, Mayor Karen Moran, on behalf of the Sammamish City Council, do hereby proclaim the month of October 2020 as National Substance Abuse Prevention Month.
Thank you, Councilmember. The next thing we have is a presentation on the Human Services Grant recommendation.
Madam Mayor, this is Mike Suggs, Senior Management Analyst. I will turn this over to our Chair and Vice Chair of the Human Services Commission, Stan Gunno and Tom Ehlers. Stan and Tom, if you're on, I will go ahead and pull up the PowerPoint for you both.
I believe I just unmuted myself. This is Tom. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, can. Good evening.
All right.
Yes, sir.
And Stan, are you there?
I'm here. Hold on. My
Right.
camera's on.
Fantastic. Thank you for having us. Stan and I are going to tag team the presentation and provide the perspective of the commission, and obviously be open for any questions you may have as when we finish up. So Stan, you want to kick it off?
Sure. Again, we would like to thank you for having us. Also, we want to let you know that the rest of our commission is watching on our beautiful television program, and I want to show their support for our recommendation and our presentation tonight. We really appreciate it. They put a lot of work into it, and hopefully things will go through. Next slide, Mike. Thank you. The presentation is going to be about our request and our grant recommendations. A summary, well, you can read everything. Our process and our recommendation. Next slide. This is our commission. Don't we look great? We appreciate you. We have a very diverse group. Next slide, Michael. As you can see, we have a lot of experience in a lot of different areas, but we still rely on our staff representation, Rita and Mike, to help us out and to stay in touch with some of the service providers in the area to let us know, you know, what needs are changing, what are the increases in needs in our area. So we appreciate the fact that you've appointed a pretty good group. I enjoy working with them and enjoy the conversations that we have. Next slide, please. If I talk too fast, let me know. I'd like to do a little summary of the needs assessment for those of you who may not be as familiar with it. Michael? Since we've incorporated Klahani, you know, the population has grown. We have a little different demographics, or actually the numbers just increase. Most of the households in Sammamish have, over half have children, which increases need as far as our mental health issues, food, rent, other issues. Our foreign-born population is about 28% right now. So when we did needs assessment, cultural inclusion comes into play. Our senior population, which I fall under, we're at about 12.5% right now of our residents who are over 60. Housing affordability, as we know, housing in Sammamish can be a little pricey. Right now, our households are suffering a little bit more of a burden through the survey. And that situation's still going to exist after Corona's gone. It's just increased a little bit more as far as people being out of work or going from 2-income families to 1, and children being home and more meals being prepared. Our city, since we are not a direct service provider, we do rely on our grantees, our other service organizations out there to help us out. So we were trying to figure out, and as you know, we have to determine what the needs are in the city of Sammamish. Next slide, please. So we did a needs assessment a couple years ago to determine what the needs in the community, the basic needs, what resources the city currently had available and what they still currently have available. And we determined there were service gaps. And the service gaps are what the needs of the citizens are, less the resources that are available. And our goal is to fill these gaps through service providers in our community. Next slide. So the needs assessment revealed that domestic violence, about 27% of women will experience domestic violence in their lifetime. It's not just limited to women, it's also including men and children. And right now with the additional stressors, it doesn't always get reported right away, but we know that looking at the other communities and things that are happening, we fall right into the national average, even though it may not be reported. Basic needs, about 4,400 people in Sammamish live under 300% of the poverty level. Granted, you know, the city has over 60,000 people, but we don't want to leave people out just because the rest of the city tends to be prosperous. Our seniors right now are feeling isolation, a little bit of a sense of lower prioritization, and that's increasing in our city as some of our citizens are aging out of the city because of being able to afford to live in the city. And with not being able to get out, this isolation has created some depression issues, and the ability to get counseling or just someone to talk to needs to increase. Next slide, please. Cultural inclusion. To finish up our other priority needs, cultural inclusion, about 27% of our residents speak a language other than English at home. And then under our mental wellness, as you know, our Sammamish teens need the ability to speak with someone and to have counseling available to them other than their parents. Parents are usually the last place teens turn to, unfortunately. And statistics show that 21% of teens have at least considered committing suicide in the past year. And this is kind of an alarming figure when you think about it. So this was the needs assessment that we set our priorities over when we went into the grant review process and started looking at what service providers could do to fill our needs. Tom? Next slide.
Thanks, Dan. So I'm going to spend just a minute or two, particularly for the newer council members that are not so new anymore, but versus 2 years ago in the last cycle, how we went about this and what our current situation is. So I'm going to review the grant process. Then we're going to get into the details of what we thought about as we worked on our recommendation. So as Stan mentioned, we've been leveraging the needs assessment for several years now, and the fact is that stands up very well when we reflect on what's happening in our community, when you talk to folks outside about what the drivers of need in our community. Those 5 really, really are what we should be focusing on. So then when you have all these grants come in, the next, Mike, if you go to the next slide, the challenge is, as you can imagine, significantly great. I mean, you guys are faced with significant challenges all the time. In this case, we simply can't fund everything. This time around, 66 programs applied. You see almost 800,000 requested. That's an incremental total of almost $300,000, $267,000 additional were asked of us. To us, that means that's an indication of the need in the community in terms of what's happening out there. You can see the current draft budget, 325, that would only get us 41% of the funding request. And it's a bit of a carryover from the last time around. So you'll hear from us tonight, not only how we would spend that, but why it's so critical, we believe as a commission, to go above and beyond. And that's the crux of our recommendation, and that's in the materials you have. How we approached this was, job one was, which grant has merit? There are some grants you can kick out right away. That's a simple reality. Either it's not right for Sammamish, or it's not appropriate. We don't believe the grantee can deliver on what they're saying. And then once you figure out which have merit, which would you prioritize? So that's a prioritization. And then, as I mentioned, we're relying on the needs assessments for guidance. So how we went about it was a pretty thoughtful, next slide please, thoughtful perspective. Applications are submitted. You guys are familiar with that. Rita and team go through them and check for completeness, and occasionally a commissioner would say, well, this is missing, that's missing. But the real work begins as the commission starts to review, and then the fireworks, to the degree there were fireworks, there's some spirited debate, but we start to debate and discuss. We actually use a scorecard I'm going to tell you about in just a second. Then we vote, and then, of course, today it's about a recommendation to council. Everything you're seeing is the work of the commission, and in total, we agree on what we're recommending to you tonight. The reality is there probably have been thousands of hours put in by the commissioners to do the work that you're being exposed to tonight. Next slide, please. The core work starts with a score sheet. We developed this a couple of years ago, and it stood up very well, so we used it again. Each commissioner, to their assigned grants, actually goes through the grant and, using the key areas you see in front of you, assess the grant and come up with a score. As you'd imagine, we focus on what's going on with Sammamish. Can they really, really deliver effectively what they say they can? Will people have access to the program, and economically, is it affordable, and is it something that we believe could be appropriate for our citizens? 4 is, what's the real impact? At the end of the day, it's nice to talk about doing good things, but what impact is there in our community? The tricky thing about service units are sometimes the most intense grant actually has relatively few service units, but it makes a significant impact on someone's lives. Other times in large groups, you have significant service units, but you don't go as deep. So we're always juggling that. And then we have a budget consideration in terms of, is this money well spent? So separately, the scorecard could be available. I won't go too deep into it, but we actually use it to start off. It's only the starting point, and then the debate and discernment come forward from there. So continuing the process, just another slide or two. The next slide. So this time around, the reality is 66 grants, we broke it into 3 subgroups. Basic needs were 1, mental wellness was 1, and then we combined domestic violence, seniors, and cultural inclusion. Commissioners took each of those, 2 per group. In one case, there were 3. They reviewed the scoring. They came back to the council or the commission with their own recommendation. Each grant was assessed independently, and then there was a preliminary scoring, and then that subgroup discerned and then brought it back to the commission. Each grant was actually thoroughly discussed by the entire commission. And then finally, the total subgroups, as we went, next slide, please, as we got back together and said, what does this look like? Not surprisingly, actually, the total subgroups were much higher than the 325 number. Not surprising because there's a lot of merit out there, but then we started discerning where we're actually able to take the recommended number down. It is higher than 325, but we fervently believe that 325 simply doesn't meet the needs in the community. We're going to go a little deeper into that in terms of how we got there. So Stan, I think I'm kicking it over to you.
Thanks. Next slide, Mike. So this gets into our recommendation for funding, and we appreciate you as council appointing us as your not quite experts in the field, but we have pretty good experience and our finger on the pulse, so it helps. Next slide, Mike. As you know, we rely on service providers for all of our human services here in Sammamish. And as the city is growing and our population is getting more diverse, we have increased needs. The basic needs were made clear by the needs assessment. We rely a lot on Rita to keep her finger on the pulse on what feedback we're getting from other cities in the area where they see needs, and keeping the finger on the pulse as far as with the service providers and making sure that they are meeting the service units that we're requesting. And so staying in touch with the community has shown that we do have a heightened need for grant support in our city. And we want to make sure that we're taking a proactive approach versus reacting to a crisis that might come up in the city, like a suicide that hits, in our high schools, or a drug death. So we want to avoid that reactive mindset. Next slide, Mike. So here's what we know about the current situation. And our overall needs since the last grant review process has went up. And we do appreciate the fact that we received additional funds in the last few grant reviews, starting with our the strategic team that started prior to our commission. But the grants are still there, or the needs are still there. Our economic strain, people in Sammamish have a little bit of cushion, but that cushion's starting to disappear a little bit as far as having that little financial. Not everybody works for big tech companies. I myself, as a small business owner, feel the impact. And I think a lot of other people do as well. The corona crisis is still ongoing. It's possible that it looks like there's going to be an extended recovery period, and that's not just for people. That includes what you're going to be discussing later on tonight with funding for businesses. Even if corona goes away totally tomorrow, the basic needs that we're looking at filling for our citizens is still going to be there. We're still going to have our young people thinking about suicide. We're still going to have domestic abuse situations. We're still going to have hungry people that need to be fed. So when we did our review, we wanted to make sure that any grants that we have, if they were overlying on different needs areas, great. That's a little double duty on substance abuse and mental health and things like that. So it's an extra bonus once we did the review process. And believe me, like Tom said, we spent a lot of hours looking at these grants. Next slide, please. As I spoke to, our basic needs are accelerating. Our food banks are busier than ever, and that includes Redmond now stepping up their support along with the Issaquah Food Bank and increasing delivery service and coming in with more diverse food sources so that they're a little more culturally inclusive. Big plus. Housing costs are high, and for a lot of our residents, that's even going up. Rent and utilities assistance have increased. Some of it's impacted by COVID, but we still have rent. We still have landlords that need that money to pay their mortgages and taxes. We have the hidden strains in our city. The mental wellness counseling is high. We need to make sure that it is easily accessible because right now it's good, but it can be improved. And looking at the numbers, not just nationally, but locally, Sammamish domestic violence is underreported. We know that. It has to be because there's no reason why we're special to the rest of the world or the rest of the nation. Seniors do feel isolated. They lack that emotional support a lot of times. They're seeking transportation. They have additional home repairs, which increases their anxiety. And having someone that can reach out to them and talk to them, our service providers have plans to put that in place. And we want to make sure that we're keeping our community connected and that we're including everybody and hopefully getting more people involved in helping others. Next slide, please. Mike, oh, there we go. As I said earlier, our per capita investment has increased over time, and we do appreciate that. But looking at the chart, even though Sammamish has an above average income base, it's interesting because it doesn't matter what level of income we have, doesn't matter what the poverty levels are in our community, these needs are still going to exist. People are still going to, money doesn't stop you from having mental health issues. Money doesn't stop you from potentially, your child thinking about killing themselves or suffering from anxiety. These needs are still going to exist. Seniors are still going to feel isolated. And that's why we went in and did the needs assessment with a deep dig and came up with the numbers that we came up with. Tom?
Thank you. And next slide. Thanks, Dan. And so in summary, a couple summary slides. When we reflected on the work that we did really on your behalf, we're here to provide counsel to you and be the voice of the community. Remember when we started with $787,000 in requested grants, we are finishing with grants totaling $440,000 that we believe reflect the true need in our community. Along the way, we've done various cuts and parses, but we as a commission are recommending that we fund this in full. It is of one piece. When you start looking at what might be under the column of 325 versus the additional 114, those are judgment calls. In truth, the total fund is needed in our community. As Stan mentioned, we are headed into difficult waters as a society, as a community. Does anyone believe the next 2 years are going to be as, not that 2019 felt like easy sailing, but relatively speaking, it was. We have unemployment issues, which put mental wellness strain, domestic violence strain, our youth are under strain, and seniors in our community feel forgotten about. So as we thought about what counsel we wanted to provide you, we look at this as a full piece, as a whole cloth. And I can share my own perspective. I run a small business and I'm out in the community quite frequently. And I can tell you, folks that I previously thought were absolutely rock solid, plumbers, people who work for airlines, people who actually have their own businesses, the strain is building. Bills are not being paid, and it's going to go well beyond what we do in COVID this year. So our recommendation is the 440. You see how it breaks out down there. To the question, how does it break out versus the last biennium? It's about a little bit more leaning toward mental wellness. We put mental wellness in that first bucket, but the total basic needs are also very great. What I'd like to leave you with is the idea that, a testament to the values of a community can be gained in part by looking at where the money's spent. I know you have many strains going into the year, and I know it's doing nothing but increasing. As a commission, we are asking for you to support us on this, and we have found value in the grants that we are bringing forward to you tonight. Next slide, please. So you might wonder, how does this all compare? I've been hearing about human services a lot, and that is true. And I want to say that Sammamish has grown in its commitment over the years. I was one of the original on the task force. I'm now finishing my time on the commission, and I can tell you Sammamish has grown. Sammamish can do more. I would be remiss, and the commission would be remiss, if we didn't pass that along. We believe there's more work to be done. In 2020, you'll recall you funded the mental wellness grant, and we thank you for that. There was some great dialogue as we got into that. If you were to combine that with the 325 and then compare it to our ask this evening, it's actually a little higher. So as Stan mentioned, so really we're coming to you asking for a little less, but these grants have merit, and reminding us that COVID in 2020 is a different set of priorities and a different perspective than the 2020, 2021. So that's kind of what we'd like to leave you with, I think, and we're very open to discussing any particular grants. And then I think Stan is just going to do a quick summary slide here.
Thank you. We realize that the city's budget is going to be tight this go around, and we appreciate that. But after reviewing all the grants, looking at the needs, we don't believe that the 325 is going to address all the needs in the city. So that's why we're asking you for the extra $114,000, so we can at least meet the needs of our citizens. It's very important. And again, if we can prevent something versus reacting to it after the fact, let's do it. I mean, $114,000 is not a big stressor when you think about someone's life. So the commission, who's watching this recommendation as well, are requesting that you approve the 440, 345. Thank you, and if you have any questions, staff's also here to help us out, I hope. Does anybody have any questions?
We do.
Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for your time.
Well,
thank you.
You guys did a great job. We do have a few questions for you. So, counselors, with the ones who have got your names in the box here, I'm going to, before we start a round robin with ourselves, I'm going to assume these are all for the Human Service Commission. Is that correct? Okay, super. Okay, so let's start at the top here and go for Councilmember Gamblin.
Yeah, hey, thank you, Stan and Tom. Really well done. Very clear. Hey, question for you. Have you looked at how the CARES Act intersects with what you guys are looking to do with the grants? Could we possibly look at each of these grants under the light of CARES Act funding? So in other words, advise the city of how each of these individual grants may qualify for CARES Act. It seems that the grants maybe can be construed as COVID-centric, so to speak, and possibly qualify for that funding. I don't know if you guys have looked at that and discarded it, or what your thoughts are.
Well, and Tom can add to it if he wants, we did consider the CARES Act when we were looking at this grant process, but we realized that that's a separate issue for the city, and if they want to apply it in a different way, that's up to them. Our biggest concern was these needs are still going to exist after that money goes away, after COVID goes away. So we tried to keep the COVID situation out of our evaluation of the grants. Tom?
Yeah, and thanks, Dan, and thanks, Ken. That's a great question. The truth is the commission has kind of focused on the merit and the need. We have not been that close to the CARES Act because our understanding of it is it's got to be impacted now. And now it's a good question. Could you use those funds even though the future impact might be in year 1 or 2? As Stan mentioned, we've been cautious to say don't get caught up in COVID 2020. We've got 2020, 21, and 22 to take care of. But if there's someone who has expertise or can somehow redirect or help, I know as a commission, we just want to see the impact in our community. So we're very open to kind of redirects or perspective if it's allowed and all that.
Okay, well, just your priority areas of mental wellness, basic needs, domestic violence, even seniors, they would seem to have some indication. I don't know whether we could have anyone speak to this now, but I think it would be well worthwhile to have this conversation if so many of your priority areas are intersecting with areas that are impacted by COVID, and it seems that they are, and then there may be some justification. So maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but I think I'd like to see that explored a little bit if that might be possible.
The little I know, enough to be dangerous I'm a small business person myself. I know PPP loans are limited to payroll and some occupation costs for a period of time, 8 weeks, or in some extreme cases, 24. So I'm not sure if that's mixing metaphors here, but I know there's probably some constraints. But very open to some consideration if it's considered appropriate.
Thank you.
Okay, next on our list is Councilmember Train.
Yeah, my question was kind of the same, and I was just thinking about the impact of COVID on teens. And as an educator and working in the program that I work, I've already seen an increase just in the students that I have and that I work with. And so I was kind of had the same idea that Ken had, is like, if we have organizations that are working with teens on the mental health side, would it be in our best interest to allocate funds from CARES Acts to meet the increase that you guys were presenting to us here in the budget? So I think I have my answer, but Tom, maybe you can speak to that, or Stan too.
Well, and again, I don't know how the CARES Act funding works, or how it's going to be authorized to be used. But if you would like to get the commission involved, we're more than happy to tell you what we know and to work with council on distribution. But we don't want to get involved unless you see a need for us to get involved.
And if I can comment, Ken, I completely agree with your observation. I mean, when you think about what drives teens, you live it every day, and how that's been ripped away from them, there's extreme strain. That's why we leaned in on mental illness funding, CrossPath, and all the other recommended funding. I'm greatly concerned that things have gotten far harsher, and adults can navigate it and get grumpy with each other every now and then, but you get through it. Teens, it's all so dire sometimes for them. So we are, again, if there's someone who's an expert in the city or the county or something that the commission would be helpful to lean in on and learn more, we're more than willing to help in that way.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Next is Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you. I want to thank Tom and Stan and the whole commission. I know you guys really do put a lot of time and care into this, and I can't thank you enough for it. But one of the things I am curious about is I love hearing you go through and talk about the needs, and I see how you leaned in on the mental wellness and the basic needs right now, but you did talk a lot about seniors and domestic violence issues. And I guess I'm just a little bit worried because it looks like we are funding a very small percentage if these numbers are right. And some of them I'm not sure if they're totally accurate. When I look at in the packet and you have a summary table, let me see what page in the packet is that. It is page 112 in the packet. And you talk about, you've got it broken down by the priority areas. You show the total requested, the total recommendation, and then you have a percent of total. And it doesn't look like those percents are exactly correct because it shows like 8% for seniors, but you're recommending 35 of 55,000. So I think those numbers are a little bit off. But just looking at the, and I guess, is that the percent of total recommendation then? Is that how am I reading that?
So seniors, I'm sorry to cut you off, Pam, the seniors would be 8% of the total dollar recommended.
Got it.
The 37.
Not how much. Got it.
So, yeah, I mean, and Stan would love your 2 cents. Each of those areas, and I happened to land initially on the cultural inclusion, seniors, and domestic violence, and you just take a really, really strong view and a stern assessment about what the needs are. And when I look at seniors, and, you know, I've been involved in the Sammamish seniors, so I recuse myself from the discernment, but I can tell you there's great need as a way of refining our community and making them welcome. And then coupled with the excellent work done by Eastside Friends of Seniors, that's a great combination. We just really pushed to get down to a reasonable number, but could there be more funding? Yes, but I think we can do generally what we need with what we're asking. Domestic violence is often about just communication. Hey, you can help yourself and be someone there. And that postcard, by the way, was an excellent start, so we all appreciate that. And then cultural inclusion shows up in a couple different ways. We did mention in our letter, what we tried to do is look at grants that have double or triple duty, that where does mental wellness and cultural inclusion interact, for instance. So we, if someone says, would you like more money? I'd say, heck yeah. We believe the recommendation is solid, it stands up to scrutiny, and it can make the impact that we believe Sammamish needs.
Yeah, and again, this is great. I guess my question, though, is, like, when I look at the mental wellness and, from everything we are reading and experiencing, a couple of things I think are happening in terms of mental wellness. One, how we deliver our mental wellness services are changing, as well as what those needs are, right? So where we may have been, where kids were experiencing a lot of peer pressure, now they're experiencing isolation, right? So things are shifting and changing. And I'm wondering, because we're only funding less than 50% of what was requested in terms of mental wellness, I worry that that's not enough for these providers who are trying to figure out a changing landscape. That's more expensive, right? It's one thing to be like, I know this is what people need, and now I have to go deliver on it. But, we're all experiencing this even in the business world. As things are changing, we're actually spending a little bit more time and a little bit more money to figure out this brave new world. So I'm curious to know, what do you think we're not funding by funding less than 50% of what was requested? And do you feel like there's a gap there at all? I'm sorry?
I don't think there's a gap. Part of the grant process is how they're going to deliver. And there were some that didn't have the means to deliver, or the anything set up, or even the ability to set anything up. One of them was NAMI in the schools. We all to meet. their points along the way and be able to provide the services. We went through these grants really hard, and we were making sure that everything was being provided. I mean, if you got an extra $200,000, we could probably find a way to spend it. But when we got down to the bottom and the nitty gritty, the additional funding that we're asking for will meet the needs of the citizen. And there's some of the grants, like Tom mentioned, Eastside Friends of Seniors. That covers more than one area. They're doing transportation, they're doing food delivery, they're doing counseling. So if we can get double bang for the buck out of a service provider, we thought that was important. Did that answer
That's great. It does, and it kind of leads into what my other question was, which is, so because we are a fully contract city and we don't provide any of these services in-house, we contract out to these providers, but we don't really contract out to them, right? Like, it's not like most of these providers are like, we're only going to provide services to the citizens of Sammamish if you write a contract for us. These are providers that exist, and if people go there, they're going to help them. So do we have a sense of how much of what our citizens need and use are all of those costs being covered, or are other areas or other jurisdictions really subsidizing Sammamish? Because I just want to get a sense of, you know, there's a large number, you know, I didn't do the math, but it's what, 55, 60% of what was requested is what we're recommending to fund. And I just want to make sure that we are making sure we're covering these providers, all the costs that they will incur to serve everyone in Sammamish.
Yes, ma'am. I appreciate that question. Yes, ma'am. Part of the, and I hope I don't offend you, that was my military, yes, ma'am. Part of...
No offense taken. I appreciate the politeness. Thank you.
Thank you. Part of the consideration that comes into place is when they submit their grant request, they tell us how many citizens they intend to serve during that period, the grant process or the grant period. And from that, they also break down how much the city is paying for, how many individuals, how many visits or whatever, and also what their other funding sources. Sammamish is not the only funding sources, and some of the organizations exceeded what they had originally got from the last grant period, and that was taken into consideration when we were doing the review process. If they increased the amount of service, we took that into consideration on how much we were suggesting the grant took place this year. Tom, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just two very quick. One, an example that we literally said we're not going to fund versus 2 years ago was the YMCA. We really leaned in on their counseling ability, and they did not deliver. And we said, you know who can do it? Is CrossPath, not YMCA. So that's a chunk. That is money that shouldn't be spent. Might upset the Y to hear that, but that is the truth. I'm wondering if Rita has any. Rita, I know you live this every day, and Pam has a great question about that. The points of interaction. Anything to add there?
So, Councilmember Stewart, you did sort of talk to are we paying our way, quote unquote. I will say that if we paid any of these, if we gave zero to all these providers, they would still provide services to our residents. It's just part of our regional responsibility of being a good sort of citizen and partner that we contribute. So as far as are there services that are not being given to our residents, that's not the case because that's not how nonprofits work, so to speak. It's not based on what we give them.
Yeah, I was actually not asking it that way. I was asking more like because they're nonprofits and they're gonna provide for people whether we give them any money or not. Are we paying our fair share to make sure that other jurisdictions or other funding sources aren't subsidizing the services that we should be paying for our citizens?
And again, I appreciate that. And in the review process, we looked at the service units that we're requesting. And if you look at the new recommendation figure, that includes those extra visits, those extra clients that are served. That's why we were asking for the additional funding.
The one.
And go ahead, Tom.
Oh, go ahead, Steve. Sorry.
Well, for example, I think it's Sophie's Way. Sophie's Way is a housing project for women that's coming up. The additional, since it hasn't kicked off, if we can't fund it, yeah, they're still going to kick off and they're still going to go. But we ask for the funding on the additional recommendation because it's going to benefit women in our area. So those are the examples. With the extra ask, we cover our share.
The one build I would have, Karen, you'll have to cut us off because we can talk about this all day, but and I don't want to, cut across questions. I've been doing this 5 years for the city of Sammamish, 4 or 5 years, task force into commission, and I'm so proud of the path we've been on. We have incrementally impacted our community and increased our resources. And kind of bluntly, if we don't incrementally fund this go round, it'll be a step back, and it'll take us off the path of growing into what human services is about. I know you guys have pressures financially in the city and all that, but could we spend more? Heck yeah. It would not be the right thing to do now, but our recommendation is warranted and thoughtful. So that's the way I think about things.
Okay.
Anyway.
I think
it just strikes me, given our per capita funding.
I think she's just trying to make sure that we are not seeing other cities subsidize any of our citizens. But Rita, if you're still on the line.
Right, because we're paying $5. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the per capita spending, we're, 35% of the next lowest.
I know, but I think that's a council question. So council member, can we leave that for a council discussion? And can we finish up with our...
It's actually not. Sorry, I don't think it is a question to council. It's a question to Human Services or to Rita to make sure that if we're only paying $5 per capita and Issaquah is paying $12.80, Redmond's paying $18.20, it feels like they might be subsidizing some of the services and we're not paying our fair share. And that's the only thing that I'm trying to make sure of.
Because I know we've had this discussion. Can you clarify for council member that you've been in touch with them weekly and they've been keeping you in touch with what the needs are for this area?
Councilmember Stewart, I check in on a fairly regular basis, especially now during COVID, with most of the nonprofits that serve our area. And so I check in with them just to find out, what their needs are. But that will be coming up later on in the evening with staff recommendations for COVID.
Can I help clarify?
Okay, this isn't. Yeah, thanks, Dan.
When we did the review process, we looked hard at what the service providers were requesting to be able to serve our citizens at no additional cost to other cities or to the point that it would affect them. And that's the reason why we want the higher recommended amount so that we could meet the numbers that they were requesting. So that was part of our review process. Are they providing what we need? I don't know if that helped.
Clearly, the mayor would like me to move on, so I'll let this go. I don't think anyone actually answered the question, but thanks anyway. It's good.
Councilmember Ross?
Thank you. I have a few questions. First of all, I'd like to compliment our human services team. They're just outstanding working through this. It's data-driven demand and impact assessment. I think it was a real good point made in the presentation that mental health is not necessarily a downward curve with wealth. However, one observation is that's offset a bit by the wealth providing more insurability of our citizens. In fact, we have a higher percentage of our citizens that are insured, which means that it's, although the need is there for mental health, not necessarily the funding is needed. That's one driver of the reduced funding needs for SAMAMS, because many are covered by insurance, and that's their source of funding. Now, I wanted to ask a question on the extra funding. We've kind of danced around that, but I want to be clear. If COVID was not here right now, the 440 is our sustaining budget absent COVID. Is that fair to say? So this is not driven by COVID, the extra 115 to get to 440. 440 is your recommended sustaining contribution setting aside without COVID impact.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. And I just want to, I'm a numbers guy, so when we talked about poverty rate of 4,400 people in one slide, and then the later slide, and I also independently earlier checked the poverty rates in SAMAMS, it's about 2.2%, or 2.2% of 65,000 is roughly 1,500 people, not 4,400 people. So how do you reconcile that data source?
So a couple things. Councilmember Ross, I'm used to saying Commissioner Ross, so Councilmember Ross. The federal government typically looks at a multiple of poverty rate to identify those that are really under stress and strain. And actually with the food bank, we go 3X. So if you're going through it from a really truly basic need requirement, you actually would take 67 or 68,000 times 2.2% times 3, which gets you to 6,000 or 7,000. And the numbers bounce a little bit. But the reality is, if you say, let's just say it's 4,400 or 5,000, the truth is those are people in need in our community. That's one thing. Two, so much, and this I guess goes without saying, but so much of what we do in human services, particularly with these grants, go well beyond what someone who might be in extreme economic need are. And I would like to offer to your comment on mental wellness that it is true that mental wellness capability is very scarce in our community or capacity. And sometimes youth can't actually access insurance. So there's definitely a need for non-insured mental wellness providers, probably because they don't want to tell their parents they're doing it, but yet they need that help. So going through the lens of assuming everybody has insurance, many do in our community because we're affluent, and with that, I think comes a whole nother burden of responsibility, but many don't have insurance, and CrossPath has kind of educated me on that as we've done our work with them.
Okay, thank you. And then the final question on cultural inclusion, I'm pleased to see investment in that area. We have some grants towards the Indian group, which is outstanding. Just a question, since 10% of the residents here are Chinese speaking, 7% roughly are language of India, don't we need some services for the Chinese community as well? And I noticed there's one on that didn't get any grants. So are we starving for some support for the Chinese community?
Tom, that was your area.
So cultural inclusion is an unfolding service, meaning we were a little disappointed we didn't get more grants on cultural inclusion. Having said that, we did get more than the previous biennium, so that was good. The reality is, if I look at the 5 need areas and I look at the last 4 or 5 years, cultural inclusion hasn't been as focused as the other ones, and I think we need to double down on that. But for the purposes of this exercise, you can't give a grant if they don't ask for it. And there was one that just had no merit. I'd have to dig that up, but there was a good reason not to go forward with that.
Fair enough.
Go down the road, we absolutely could double down.
And then can I just also add to that? Sorry,
Yes, please.
So Councilmember Ross, that was a great question. So when it came to the Chinese Information Service Center, they did get funding last go round, but they were not able to provide any service units. So as part of the assessment, when the commissioners look at the grant applications, I also try and give them a historical context of if it's a repeat application, to give them some idea of like, have they been able to deliver those service units in the past? And unfortunately, CISC were unable to deliver those service units, and we have reached out to them to try and see if we can try and advertise their services. But I think that may have something to do with the decision not to fund them.
No, thank you very much. Outstanding job, all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Council.
Okay, then I have got, I have a question, one more question. And this one, this goes also to the mental wellness. And this comes from working in the schools quite a bit and knowing that so many of our kids go to the youth side services and Friends of Youth. And so, you know, not seeing the grants that they put in, but seeing that we're funding them at 50%, was there something else that was included in those grants that was besides just hours for counseling services?
So that was mine. Didn't memorize all of these, but I'd have to go back. I believe we ended up funding them similar to what we had done the previous period of time. And because we were strained on the money, we felt somewhat comfortable with that. They're an excellent organization, no question. But when we were making just tough decisions, we felt comfortable with that.
Can I add?
Yes.
The grant requests that we received were not increasing service units from the last grant cycle, or it was fairly insignificant. So that's the reason why we stuck to the dollar figure we did.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, we gave the 10K last time around, Karen, so we stayed there because we didn't see, I mean, they're a great organization, but that was the process we felt we had to go through.
And staff has all the record of service units met and the service units requested on the new grant cycle if you need to go through the grants for any reason. But we went through them pretty hard, so.
Okay. Yeah, you guys did a really thorough job. I mean, you guys did an amazing job. So you guys you guys clearly went through them with a fine-tooth comb. Okay, we have one more question, and that is from Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. So first, thank you all for the work on this. I'm sure it's hard when you get a lot of requests to have to whittle it down to a reasonable budget ask to council. So I do have a couple of questions, and I think we kind of touched on it a little bit, and I think Councilmember Gamblin and Councilmember Trina had similar questions at the top of the Q&A here. But there were some indications during your presentation, however, that some of these grant fund asks were because of COVID to some degree. And to that end, I'm kind of curious, because we don't have access to the applications, if there was some indication in the applications about COVID-related impacts, because I think where Councilmember Gamblin was going is that those portions of those asks that are COVID impact related could be used with CARES Act dollars as opposed to impacting the biennial budget. I'll let you go with that one first, although I know you guys said you couldn't answer the CARES Act funding part, but I'm curious if there were references to COVID impacts in the grants themselves, because we don't have that information.
Can I defer to staff? Rita? Are you there?
Yeah, yes, of course.
Do you recall at the end of the grant request how much they went into COVID?
So it all depended on each individual application. So some applications did refer to COVID and talked about because, the applications were filled out at the beginning of the COVID season, not even season, that's the wrong word, at the beginning of the pandemic. So they submitted their applications in April, and at that point, no one was quite sure as to what was going to happen. So some people did talk to COVID, some applications did not. And just to remind everyone, this is for 2021, 2022 service units. This is not for now. This is for next year and the year after. So some people did and some people didn't.
Yeah, no, I understood. I think I'm just curious on, if they referenced COVID and that impacting, their operations and subsequently their ask in their grant. That would be important to parse out as far as, grants for that 2021, 2022 cycle versus an impact we could make for them now with CARES Act dollars. So that would be,
I would jump in that. And Deputy Mayor, I will jump in and say that really no one actually specified that there was more. My sense was there wasn't an additional ask because of COVID. They may have referred to COVID to talk about the way they may be delivering their service units in a different way or more the way they're delivering services. But as far as an additional ask related to COVID, I don't believe that was the case. I could be wrong, but on the majority that they didn't reference that.
Okay. And the second ask, and I'm glad Councilmember Ross asked about the Chinese Information Service Center because I had a similar question there. But I do have another question embedded in that cultural inclusion area, which is one of the programs that we're funding for IAWW just simply says the program is human services. So it looks like it's misplaced in cultural inclusion when they're providing human services, but that is so vague. I have no idea what they're covering. And so my question is, in that category, what human service needs are they covering for Sammamish residents that are not being covered by other human service providers? And again, because it's so vague, I don't know if we're talking, they've already covered mental health, so it's not that. And then they have a cultural navigation program that we're also funding. So is it food related? Is it rental assistance? And like I said, it just looks like it's not categorized properly because it doesn't look like it's culturally exclusive. It's about human services. But I think it's important to distinguish.
I can speak to that, and Tom, Stan, please jump in. So there are three, that's just the way they've referenced that grant application. It's not a great title. There are three areas within that. One is seniors. Number two is women and helping and a women's networking group. And number three is seniors and the youth program. Actually, the youth, I've got to quickly look back. So there are three, so when they say human services, there's particular niches that they're covering. I can quickly look that up now. Tom, do you want to speak a little bit more about that?
Tom, this is the one that you reviewed.
Yes, and so Rita has it right. It actually are three components. And the thing with IAWW, we've worked with them pretty deeply now relative to Sammamish Senior Center and others. They do attach and draw a very distinct audience, and that has to do with cultural inclusion. How do we connect them more broadly? But what they do is they set up programs for those that would be interested in connecting with their kind of cultural group. They never exclude, but they actually go much deeper than many other programs that we have. An example is when we set up the Sammamish Senior Center, they already have a senior center going, and they gave us all their programming. They connected with us, so they're really a great partner. So I would say, well, it's true, they're under the umbrella, but they go much deeper, and then they share it with us. So perhaps one day we could have a program like that more broadly for Sammamish. And they're a pretty big group, actually. If you look as a percent of our total community, they're actually quite large percent-wise. So that's why we feel a lot of confidence in funding them directly.
Well, it's good to know what that breakdown is specific to the human services category there, because then it actually does, while it's not a huge chunk, because I think that bundle for them is $12,000, when you break it up, there are additional fundings then in that senior bucket. And then, you know, there's not a specific bucket for women or youth unless you're looking at mental health. But at least, you know, it gives some color then to what that is. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
That's good. Thank you for the question.
Mayor?
Okay, council members, is there any more questions that we have for our crew from the Human Services Commission? Okay, Stan and Tom, you did an excellent job. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much.
Appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Bye.
I think I'm cutting off, right? How do we do that? Thanks, everybody.
Okay, so council. Looking at all of your information. Okay, so going back here, looking at the information you have, we've now gone a full circle with anybody who wanted to speak. Is there anybody else who had anything that they wanted to say on this issue? Okay. So then, Councilmember Treen.
Yeah, I move that the City Council approve the Human Services Commission's recommendation for 2021-2022 grant funding.
Second.
Okay, can I make a friendly amendment?
Question on that?
Okay, oops, Councilmember Stewart?
I was going to say, I didn't think we approved this now. I thought we would just take it up as part of the budget process. We don't actually approve now, do we?
We do have,
This is just what they're asking for, and we deal with it as part of the budget, yes?
nope, we were asked to approve it so that we could send
There's
it
no
to
motion
the
to
budget.
It's an action item.
It's an action item,
Okay.
yes.
Excellent.
Okay, so.
Okay, great.
I have did you have something more, Councilmember? I don't want to cut you off.
No, that was it. Thank you.
I would like to make a friendly amendment to that, is that as we move that forward, we ask that it be looked at for anything that could be looked at for COVID. Okay.
Second.
I would second that.
Okay, so looking with the amendment, friendly amendment, of having everything, I mean, I don't know if we need to vote on that separately.
If it's an
Yeah, I was
amendment.
going to say, I don't know how we, don't we have to take a dollar amount forward?
Yes. Up, Councilmember Ross has a question.
Yes. The amendment, are we speaking to the amendment?
Yes.
Okay. The amendment strikes me as a little bit of a cart before the horse. If we're determining that part of the 440 is COVID related, then there's budget implications of that as you parse it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard the commission say several times that 440 is a number that needs to sustain us going forward, both this year and the next biennium. And therefore, COVID would not impact it. COVID would only increase that number. In fact, we have Section 10 on our agenda, I believe, that talks about COVID-related grant requests. So for that reason, I think doing an audit of the 440 is really challenging. Is 440 needed or something less? And so if through their due diligence, they believe 440 is the amount that is not COVID related and is the necessary amount to meet the service needs of our community this year and the next year in 2021, I think that amendment is not necessary unless we're concerned, based on what we've heard today, that that's not the case.
Okay. Yeah, we were just looking to look through those or anything that wasn't picked up, to look for anything in there that might possibly like some of the grants were only partially funded, to look through to see if there was anything that was COVID related that could possibly be looked at. Councilmember Stewart, you had a question?
Yeah, I think Councilmember Ross, you kind of summarized what I was saying. I would just clarify for the public, which is this 440 is for 2021, 2022. It's not anything for this year at all. And I think Rita answered quite succinctly. These grant requests were submitted in April. I would be shocked if in April any of these providers thought that they were going to still be needing money for COVID in 2021 and 2022. So I don't believe that any of this 440, 345 it has any COVID relationship whatsoever. This is about just sort of the normal stuff. Now, we may see that we're going to get more requests if COVID does continue into 2021 and 2022, but this is not about that. So I appreciate the spirit of the amendment, but I don't think it's applicable. And I think for the sake of the motion, we need an actual dollar figure. And to say we're going to kind of look at something, I don't know that it's specific enough.
Well, okay. I was just trying to look to see if we couldn't fit the needs. It wasn't going to bring the number down in any way. I was figuring it was going to leave the number as it was.
Okay.
Wow. Okay, well, forget double checking anything, my. Okay, I will remove my, which is ridiculous. Pardon me? No.
Sorry, did you withdraw your motion?
Yes, I will remove.
Amendment, sorry.
Let's just move on. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. And the motion on the floor, would you please repeat the motion, Mr. Councilmember? I
move that the City Council approve the Human Services Commission's recommendation for 2021-2022 grant funding.
Madam Mayor, you still have Jason in the queue.
Oh, okay. So, and first of all, could you put a dollar amount with that, Councilmember? Thank you.
440,
and then we have,
345.
Yes, let's get your dollar amount. Okay. Okay, so, and we've got a question from Councilmember Ritchie.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Mayor, I'm going to try to read your mind, which I know is a dangerous place to go, but I think what you were asking for, or what I would think we would want to ask for, would be if the 440 is representative of April asks, have there been any subsequent changes to budget that are directly related to COVID? And could we direct the city, the Human Services Commission, to provide us COVID-related expenses, grant requests specific to the time period of COVID time between, say, April till now? Is that kind of where you were going?
Yeah, but it looks like we can bring that into our discussion at our next grant when we talk about the Human Services grant. So we're just going to let this one die. But thank you.
But have we provided them sufficient direction to do that, though? I guess that was my big question.
Well,
do they understand that that's what we want from them?
From Mr. Sugg, it looks like it would. We can squeeze it into the next discussion on the Human Services grant. So we'll just let this one go. Okay.
Right on.
So we have a motion on the floor. We have a second. And so was there any other discussion? Okay. All those, and I'm going to recuse myself because of the fact that I sit on a board of one of the people that would be receiving funds, and that's come up. So all those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. You've got a... All right, excellent. Human Services Group, you did an excellent job. Okay, next up we've got a public hearing. Authorize the city manager and the director of community development to grant exceptions to the duration and frequency requirements set forth in Sammamish Municipal Code 21A.70.195-2 for the temporary encampments, providing for severability, declaring an emergency, and establishing an immediate effective date. And it would be 02020-210. Mr. Sugg.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Council, and Mr. City Manager. Once again, Mike Sugg, Senior Management Analyst, joined on the line by Rita Bod, Senior Human Services Coordinator, and David Pyle, Director of Community Development. At the City Council's meeting on September 1st, staff provided an update on Tent City 4 and their potential relocation to Faith United Methodist Church in Kalahani. At the same meeting, staff conveyed the next steps were to return on September 15th to hold a public hearing and consider an ordinance that would exempt Tent City from the encampment time limitations in the code. This exemption ordinance is included in your packet tonight as Exhibit 1 and would accomplish three things. The first, it would exempt Tent City and Faith United Methodist Church from the homeless encampment time limitations in our code. The second is that it would extend Tent City's permit at Mary Queen of Peace for the minimum time needed to process a permit for the Faith Church site. And three, it would specify that Tent City must vacate Sammamish when Faith Church is no longer able to host, but in no case shall they stay later than March 31st of 21. This ordinance would only exempt Tent City from the time limitations in the code. They would still need to follow all other code requirements in order to receive a permit. So this agenda item provides an opportunity for the council to hold a public hearing and receive comments on the proposed ordinance. If the council would like to postpone adoption of this ordinance until October 6th in order to receive more public comment, you may wish to instead adopt Exhibit 2, which would extend Tent City's permit at Mary Queen of Peace as it is currently set to expire on September 20th. Staff have spoken to Mary Queen of Peace representatives who said they would be fine with extending Tent City's stay should the public hearing be extended as well. With that, I will turn it back over to the mayor for any discussion or questions.
Okay, so we're going to open the public hearing. Do we have anybody from the public online to speak to this?
We do not.
We do not. Okay, council. Do we have anybody from council that has got, and I'm going to go onto the chat box and put this in. Okay, is there anybody who has got questions regarding, okay, Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah, just a quick one. First, I want to really thank staff and the members of council that have leaned in on this to help make this happen, in addition to the members of the community, because I just think this is really important. And I just had a quick question on the ordinance. Why do we have under no circumstances can they stay beyond March of 2021? What's the rationale for having that in there? And again, I'm not suggesting that they should stay longer than that, but just given the nature of everything going on in the world, it's like we've got COVID and now like the world's on fire. I hate for us to put something in there arbitrarily or without a really good rationale, because it just feels like we just can't anticipate what else might happen.
Yeah, I think that is obviously, or that provision is open for council discussion. I think that was included mainly as to give Tent City, I guess, an idea of when the city might want them to consider moving to an alternative site. But you know, you're absolutely correct. This pandemic could be going on for much longer than anyone expects. And in any case, the city council could choose to extend that deadline if we are coming up close to it and COVID is still an issue in the city. So again, up for council deliberation on that one.
So just to clarify, so there wasn't really anything magical about the amount of time or that date. It was just to put a stake in the ground.
Correct.
Mike, Mike, if I could add to this, this is David Pyle. So during the last meeting where this was discussed, there was some council feedback on wanting to set a firm departure date to make sure that Tent City was aware that although the city had welcomed them and had extended their stay, that there should be at a point where, as a temporary use, they do depart the city. The commentary that we received identified that it may not be appropriate to ask them to leave in January, that it might be more appropriate to ask them to leave at a time when it's easier to dismantle a camp that's not in the middle of winter. So the end of March was a date that the staff set in the ordinance initially. Council could choose to eliminate that or to set it to March or April.
And I guess the only other question is, have all the notifications gone out, and has the community meeting occurred? Has all of that happened?
No, actually, that is why we've got the two different ordinances sitting here. And the one is to leave the hearing open until the 6th, is that correct? Is because the church has not had its meeting yet. It's wanted to leave it open so that they could have their meeting, and if anybody had any questions or anything, they could come to council, and it would give them the opportunity to address it here, rather than have a hearing tonight and then they would have their meeting and they would never be able to come and talk to us. So we didn't want to kind of put them in that spot.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate that.
Okay, is there any other questions? Okay,
do you need a motion, Mayor?
I would love one.
And based on your comments, it sounds like we should lean towards option 2.
Is it 2 that holds the... Is that option 2 that holds the hearing open?
Yeah, so I would move that we leave the hearing open until October 6th, and we extend the amount of time that Tent City can stay at Mary Queen of Peace, per whatever we say here in this ordinance, in the O-2020-499.
And decide that in October as well? I mean, we have to put a date in there, so.
I think it's already in here, isn't it? Checking really.
Mr. Sugg?
Another 30 days. So it would be until October 20.
Right. So I think the motion in this case would.
So I'll clarify my motion. Yeah.
Okay, clarify your motion, please.
Sorry, I can go ahead and. Sure. So the motion is to extend the public hearing on the updating of our code until October the 6th, and to also extend the amount of time that Tent City can stay at Mary Queen of Peace for another 30 days or until October 20th.
Okay, excellent. Is there a second to that?
Second.
I don't know what it is.
Deputy Mayor, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I seconded it. No, I seconded it.
Okay, you kind of cut out on me here. So did you have a comment? Oh, you were the second. There you go. Okay. So we had, all right, so have any discussion? Nope, hearing none. Okay, all those in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, hearing none. All right, so it's 7-0. Thank you. Okay, next is, and we are leaving that open, so we did not close that hearing. The next we have is public hearing, opening up public hearing. And this is for ordinance 02020-211. It's a public hearing adopting a new chapter 5.45 to the Sammamish Municipal Code relating to the delivery of unsolicited or unsubscribed handbills and literature on private property, providing for severability and establishing an effective date. And who's going to speak to that?
Mayor, that would be me, Lisa Marshall, your city attorney.
Lisa, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
So, thank you, Mayor, members of the council. The City Council first reviewed this ordinance on September 1st, and the feedback that I received during that meeting was that the council would like to see two major changes to the ordinance. So rather than having the individual residents who do not want to receive literature have to undertake an effort to go onto the website and opt out, I've revised the ordinance so that the default position is that no leaflets would be distributed unless a resident opts in. So that's the first major change. The second is to graduate the penalty. So the first offense is $100, a second is $250, and a third $500. And of course, you're free to make changes to those proposed penalty amounts, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, I'm sure there's going to be questions. So, okay, so we are going to do a round robin, but the first question, so we'll start with Councilmember Stewart.
Great. So first off, at the last meeting, I asked for some data, and when I had my follow-up meeting with the city manager last week, he had promised me that. I still haven't seen any, and that data is around the public safety. So if we just go through, I'll just start at the top with the whereas clauses. So the first one says that these that this advertising creates unhealthy, widespread litter. Do we have any data that actually backs that up? Because again, I don't think anecdotal evidence is data, but I can say that I don't see that as a widespread or health issue. So do we have data that says that this is in fact a widespread health litter issue?
No, that data would be,
Go ahead, Lisa.
Typically, whereas clauses or recitals are for background information. Had they been intended to provide data to you, they would have been incorporated as findings of fact. Because the data is anecdotal, because it's observation by you, by me, I didn't intend the whereas clauses to be a substitute for data. And so to answer your question, no, not really. I didn't find any studies or reports about pollution and leaflet distribution.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Lisa. The second whereas clause, we talk about elderly and disabled residents who are unable to remove these materials, and they're blown around the neighborhoods by wind, wet and destroyed by the elements, and run over by vehicles. Again, I just want to understand, are we getting complaints about this? Do we have any information or complaints from people where this is causing a problem?
I'm not aware of any other staff members want to weigh in. Please feel free to do so, or council members if you have comments.
Mayor, members of council from the city
this is the one where I had asked. Yes.
Mayor, members of council from the city manager's office. I only received anecdotal discussion about debris around drainage. The drainage sumps and things like that, but it wasn't specific as to literature.
Great. Okay. Thank you for that, Mr. City Manager. And then this is the one where I really want data. I think if we're going to make a statement that says that the distribution of this material upon residential properties creates security concern for residents when such materials accumulate in the city. Again, do we have any data from our police department? Has there been actual complaints or any linkage of this occurring to that? And again, I just want to make sure that if we're going to sign our names to something with all these whereas clauses, that there's some facts to back this up.
Mayor and Council, this is. Hi, can you hear me?
Oh, I can now.
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say from our end, and this was brought to my attention at the end of the week, we have not received any calls in regards to this. I think Lisa will confirm, it doesn't fall under our soliciting ordinance. It's separate. So we will often, in most summers, get 100 plus calls on the soliciting end of things. But most of the time, people that are leaving these handbills are just putting them inside the door, setting them on a mailbox, types of things. They're not actually, they don't fall under the soliciting because they're actually not knocking on the door and trying to sell something. We have not received calls on this. We haven't seen it. I know that there was some discussion, and yes, if there's a lot of mail stacking up on a door, those types of things, that could be cause for concern and people that are looking to do bad things. That's a clue that possibly someone's not home. But we haven't received those calls and have not seen a lot of that. So that's the information that I have.
Great, thank you so much, Chief. I really appreciate that. So the other questions I have, so we also talk about having exempt distributors deliveries, and I don't know, it says exempt distributors deliveries are less bulky and less likely to clog or impede the city's stormwater collection system. And I'm confused because I don't understand how this flyer clogged it, but this flyer, because it's from somebody else, doesn't clog it. Like, either it's a problem or it isn't, right?
I think I can answer that, Councilmember Stewart. The exemptions apply to mail that's solicited, that mail that's delivered by post, and subscribed mail, but it also includes literature that's attached to a doorknob with a rubber band or taped to the outside of somebody's home or garage. And those are exempted because they don't clog the drains because they're fastened.
Okay, but again, I think we just heard that we don't have any actual data that says that the ones that aren't fastened are clogging the drains, correct?
Well, I don't think that the directions to me to write this ordinance required me to collect data. So with that, I would simply add that.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And I'm not trying to lay blame. I'm just trying to get clarity. And then I just have a couple more. One is this next one where it says that to address security, nuisance, and litter issues, all distributors must secure their literature in a way that the literature does not scatter or decompose due to weather conditions, and so that the literature is out of clear view from the public right away. In the actual ordinance, I believe it says that it needs to be affixed, like you said, with a rubber band, and then it has to be somehow protected from the elements. And I would ask, wouldn't that encourage, well, first of all, we're asking them people to use rubber bands, bad for the environment, and wouldn't that encourage people to put their flyers and things in plastic? And as I understood it, the whole premise of this was to reduce the amount of plastic being distributed, that this was supposed to be about a concern over plastic, which I can totally get behind if we want to ban all single-use plastics. But I'm confused because if we're trying to eliminate plastics, and I think Councilmember Treen, you even called out, right, that yes, microplastics are terrible, and so we should get rid of the plastics, but this sounds like it's encouraging people to put their stuff in plastic. Is that correct? Is that how the ordinance reads?
I'm not sure I would say it is encouraging literature to be placed in plastic, but I also disagree that the point of the ordinance was to decrease plastic. I thought the point of the ordinance was to decrease security concerns and decrease the amount of stuff blowing out around on sidewalks and on roads and in your front lawn.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. And then a couple more. Vendors and distributors who operate in the city have a history of ignoring their own refusal of consent, registry, or programs. Again, I did not know that was a problem. Do we have, again some information on this?
Again, anecdotal, but I have had conversations with your retired city clerk regarding complaints that she's received. I personally have been aware of solicitors being asked not to come to people's homes, and they still do.
Right.
I think it's widely known that solicitors will push the envelope there.
Sure, and again, talking about soliciting, totally different thing, and I would agree. The other thing I wanted to just ask about is when this was presented last time, it was, as you presented this time, you talked about it being a narrowly tailored regulation, but I feel like with the opt-out versus the opt-in, it is no longer narrowly tailored, right? It is now a very broad and sweeping regulation.
I think, in my opinion, it still would withstand constitutional scrutiny based on a commercial speech analysis, which is not as protected as political or religious speech. There are other avenues for commercial speech purveyors to distribute their message. This doesn't prevent them from doing that.
Fair enough, but this doesn't address that. It just says that this is a narrowly tailored regulation, and this doesn't feel narrow to me anymore when it's an you have to opt in as opposed to opting out. And then it says a content neutral annual exclusion. I don't know. So I was in reading through the ordinance, I was confused. Does that mean that we can, someone could do, if they only distribute literature once a year, then they're excluded?
That was intended to address phone books that are distributed once a year. And apparently, the city of San Carlos, California, worked quite diligently with the distributors of phone books there, at least, to provide an annual exclusion. And in my sort of layperson's view, this isn't a legal opinion necessarily, but my thinking was, well, if the San Carlos phone book distributors are happy with once a year, perhaps they'll be happy with once a year up here as well. So that was the exclusion that was in that particular ordinance, and I copied it here.
Okay, but it doesn't say it has to be a phone book, right? It just says literature delivered no more frequently than once per year.
Right. So if the citizens of Sammamish can live with unsolicited material once a year, then they'll probably get a phone book on their porch, perhaps some other things as well.
Okay. And then in G, it says literature delivered by a person on behalf of a nonprofit organization, a registered campaign committee. Registered by whom to where? What does that mean?
In the state of Washington, it would most likely be the Public Disclosure Commission or some other organization that tracks those kinds of activities, but that specific exemption is intended to exempt political speech, which is pretty important to do. So I would add that if somebody came to my door with a political message, I would not ask for their credentials or to see who they registered with. I think that it would be difficult to track that.
Right. I think so too. And so I'm concerned that we're writing that it has to be sort of a registered thing. And what I'm looking at overall is, while we may go down this, you have to opt in to get a flyer as opposed to opt out, because we have to provide these exemptions for a plethora of reasons, it's going to be confusing to people. And so either businesses are going to inadvertently break the law, right, unintentionally, which is no excuse to it, but they're going to be trying to comply possibly, or more likely not even know that this exists. But on the flip side, people who are aware of this are going to be thinking, I'm not supposed to be getting anything. And every time they get a flyer, no matter what kind of flyer it is, they're going to call up and make a complaint. And that's going to generate a lot of work for our staff. The other two other things that were just kind of shocking to me. One was that there is another exemption that says if you deliver it by hand, placed in the hand of intended recipient. This we want to implement during COVID. Like, this seems very ill-timed to me, that during a pandemic, we're going to say the only way you can distribute this is if you actually make contact with someone. That doesn't seem like a good thing for us to be doing right now. And the other one is this presumptions and removal and costs required. If I read this correctly, what is it, 5.45.070A, are we saying that the violators could have to come and remove all of the flyers that they distributed in violation of this? Or pay, if the city goes and removes it, they'd have to pay the cost to the city? Are we saying that?
Yeah, yes, we are. And it's not unlike during political season when campaign signs are placed illegally. Every single year in November, our code enforcement in every city I've ever worked in has a difficult time keeping up with the illegally placed signs. And so code enforcement usually picks them up, puts them in an office in City Hall somewhere, and asks people, the person who placed them, to come pick it up. So that would be what we would do here.
But this says that the person who did it would have to pay for it, right?
Right. That's also in compliance with our code enforcement process. Code enforcement violators are required to pay the administrative cost of the city's effort to bring them into compliance. That shouldn't be on the taxpayers.
Okay. And then the last one is the penalty section. And so just to clarify, it says that each distribution of unsubscribed, unsolicited literature in violation shall constitute a separate offense. Does that mean if I pass out 100 flyers in one fell swoop, is that one offense or is that 100 offenses?
100 offenses.
Okay, so if I did this and I either wasn't there or I didn't understand and I hit up 500 houses, it would be 500 times $100.
Correct.
Wow. Okay. I just think that, again, I am all for anything that reduces pollution as long as it's reasonable and easily understood and easily enforced. I know that Councilmember Gamblin said, you know, after we passed a $500 fine, the docks were clear. Well, that actually wasn't true. I was out over Labor Day weekend and the docks were packed again. So I don't know that this is necessarily going to do that, not because I think people are nefarious, but I think that, again, they're not going to know about this. And in terms of being cutting edge, I don't see banning flyers as cutting edge from an environmental standpoint. There are a lot of things that we can do to be cutting edge. There are, you know, near zero carbon building innovations. There are things like we could actually build out our dashboard and start tracking our greenhouse gas emissions and start to understand what those are and what ways we could go to reduce those. I think that there are a lot of things we could do that would have a much bigger impact given the amount of effort that our staff is going to be under if they start getting a lot of calls on these. Because I can imagine if somebody wasn't aware and they did a big, massive drop, this could be huge and they could get a lot of calls. I also think we're 7 weeks from an election. We have a postal service who's struggling to get people's drugs delivered, let alone other types of mail. And to encourage people to have to hand stuff out to a person's hand right now, and when small businesses are hurting, I just don't see this as being a big priority for us. I just don't think this is what we should be spending our time on and asking our code enforcement staff to be spending our time on. I think if we want to work on something that's going to reduce pollution and reduce plastic in the city, I am all in. We'll dedicate. I will stay up all night for weeks working on that. But I don't see this having a huge positive impact, and I see this as being burdensome on small businesses and potentially just creating confusion. Thank you.
Okay, let's see. is next? Councilmember, Deputy Mayor, were you next? Nope. Councilmember Gamblin, were you next?
I don't know, but I'll be happy to go.
Okay, all yours.
Okay, so again, I'm not sure what the massive confusion is. It's very simple. I did an online search today for stormwater, runoff, pollution, plastic. There's dozens of articles on here talking about debris, plastic bags running into storm drains, creating problems. This is from the EPA. Debris, plastic bags, six-pack rings, washed into water bodies can choke, suffocate, or disable aquatic life. So plastic bags are a problem. The EPA sources of solutions of stormwater. There's another EPA talking about stormwater pollution. Again, so stormwater pollution means stuff's on the road, the stormwater comes along, and it washes it into the storm drain. That's what happens when you chuck stuff on people's driveways. It rains, it washes them into the storm drains, and now you got a bunch of plastic bags and rubber bands and whatever else they happen to chuck on the driveway in the storm drain. It's not a confusing issue. Stormwater pollutants, here's another one. Litter. This is litter. This is being thrown on people's driveways. If it doesn't get picked up, it becomes litter. Okay? The second part, so the first part is environmental. If you want to improve the environment, we're not saying that this is the end all, that there's nothing else we'll need to do. This is one way, one step toward improving the environment of the city and keeping the potential pollution from people throwing stuff in your driveway out of our stormwater. It's very simple. Second thing is security. I live on a block where people go away for the winter. When they're away, stuff accumulates on their driveway, and it's an open invitation for anybody driving by to see that no one is home in that house. It is a security issue. It's an invitation for that house to get broken into. And if we can stop that from happening, public safety is our number one concern as a government agency, and we should darn well take the steps necessary to protect our residents from potentially being broken into. Even worse than that, what if an individual just doesn't like picking stuff off their driveway? What if they don't like to pick up the stuff? Then they're at home, somebody breaks in, and they're home when they break in. It's even worse. So again, this is not a highly conflictive deal. If we're uncomfortable with the fine amount, as was mentioned, that $500 doesn't seem to keep people off the docks, possibly it shouldn't be graduated. It should be a larger fine. The larger the fine, the more you stop people from doing it. So I'm comfortable with the way it's laid out. I think it gives some flexibility. But again, if we're uncomfortable that the fine isn't going to be effective, then we could increase that. But I think the way the ordinance is written now takes care of that. Highly effective, easy to do, improve the environment, work and provide for the safety of our residents. Seems like an automatic to me. I think it's a great ordinance. I'll be voting for it. Thank you.
Councilmember Ritchie, followed by Councilmember Ross.
Thank you. I guess, after reviewing all this and talking about it for a couple weeks, I can certainly appreciate the intent, at least on two legs, right? The intent of trying to cut down plastic waste that is essentially thrown into driveways. I'm thinking of those little bags that have kind of a folded up advertisement in it and a couple little rocks in there to kind of hold it in place. We get those quite often. Thinking of being Klahani, we get the Issaquah Reporter. It's kind of wrapped in a plastic bag, and if you run it over a couple times, it gets kind of nasty. So I guess my overarching thought is the plastics, I'm totally in. I think that makes a lot of sense to try to avoid loosely thrown or randomly thrown plastics placed on driveways rather than secured to a door. I think that is a rational, reasonable, environmentally considerate thing to do. what I'm concerned about is that this appears, I mean, and putting a fine behind it, I get all that. I mean, we need to put teeth behind our ordinances, and I get that. So, but that's not what this does. This has gone to a different level where now we're talking about paper products and biodegradables, things that kind of, you know, and maybe that is trash, and that falls into the second component, which is just, you know, the broken window thing, right? We're worried about the general upkeep of our neighborhoods and things like that. And while I appreciate that, and I guess I'm more concerned about where we are from a societal standpoint when we're dealing with COVID, we're dealing with huge employment issues and economic issues. And, you know, being a small business owner, I feel like a certain amount of, you know, I feel uncomfortable with government telling businesses how to do that. I don't think it's a good idea. I think it's not a smart idea. I don't think it's effective. But having said that, I can hear the argument for that. I can appreciate the thought process behind that in terms of just general welfare and upkeep of our neighborhoods. The opt-in versus opt-out, I get it. I think the opt-in is, you know, it's safer on budget in terms, or budget meaning staff time. You know, if people really want this and they have to call versus, and that'd probably be a smaller number. I mean, I do lack the confidence, you know, the Councilmember Gamble and the author has in this. I think that there's a lot of gray here that we could look at. So to that end, I would like to offer an amendment that we, a two-part amendment. One, that we, if it's a two-part amendment or two amendments, I'll put it this way. I would like to offer an amendment that we only include plastic bags in the usage of this ordinance. Nothing wrapped in plastic, and keep everything else the same way. I think I can get on board with that and find that middle ground and focus on the plastics being the major contributor, at least anecdotally, that we're seeing. The second thing I would like to offer, the Second Amendment, I don't know if I should do that, Chair. Should I do two amendments or one? What do you got?
Well, we don't have a motion, and we're not going to have a motion until we finish the round robin, but you can throw, like we did last time, throw your ideas out there so that we can include them in the original motion.
Good idea. I appreciate that. So my second idea would be to, I think there's been some comments made, I don't know who it said, but just in terms of the awareness of what we're getting ourselves into. I did some research on the San Carlos thing, or some research. I read through it, and I don't know that I come up with the same analysis of what we're trying to do here. I don't know that is an on-point analysis, but I'm not a lawyer, so, you know, I'll defer to the city attorney on that. But at the same time, I feel like there could be some more research done that isn't anecdotal, and we could direct staff to try to figure out what is our bang for our buck here, right, in terms of the actual amount of plastics that go into our city that could be reduced by removing the plastics or taking the plastics out of these things, out of these essentially kind of tossed around advertisements. To me, that's really interesting stuff because I do think there's a lot of science we actually could apply and some data that we could apply and that would make sense and that we could actually say we are stopping or at least trying to mitigate this problem by doing this versus just a catch-all of everything. It just seems kind of heavy-handed. And, you know, then we start talking about the fines. It seems really heavy-handed. Now, having said that, you know, I certainly agree with the approach of trying to do something. I'm just trying to find a way to support it, and I'm hoping there's room for compromise. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Ross, then followed by Deputy Mayor.
Okay. Apart from the environmental aspects, which have been discussed already, quite a few council members, I wanted to jump in and talk a little bit about another key part of this is security. Sammamish in particular is crime of opportunities, unsecured homes, unsecured cars, and then telegraphing that they're not home with literature more than a piece that's or dated. You know, even criminals are as sophisticated as knowing that a piece of literature was distributed on Monday. Even if it's the only piece of literature on Wednesday, they're going to say, "Oh, they're not home." So I'm concerned about the security aspect significantly. I support it from that strongly, and then also the environmental byproduct advantages of it. Number two is the opt-in registry. Actually, I see that as an advantage to businesses and solicitors, because if you've got a list from the city that tells you who is open to receive literature, you're going to hit a much greater target market and offend far fewer people, but people are open to receiving your literature. So I see that as an advantage to business. And so that I'm very comfortable with the opt-in registry. I think it's a good approach, both from the city administration standpoint as well as, I think, business. I take a different path. Finally, as far as penalties, that gets me a little bit ruffled when out of the gate, if someone even though it's a $100 fine, they deliver 500 pieces, that's $5,000. I don't want to go an innocent business that solicits their literature gets a bill for $5,000. I really don't want to see that happen in this city. That's why I even suggested last time that we have a graduated fine procedure. Maybe we go on just a one-time fine, kind of like a warning, a $100 fine, a warning, and that they get clarity on what happens next time. Next time is $250 per piece. Next time is $500 per piece. But they get a clear warning. They walk away with only a $100 fine, and we're not just burying these small businesses unexpectedly who are not aware of this ordinance. So that's my thoughts on that penalty part.
Okay, then Deputy Mayor.
Thanks. I hadn't even thought of the point that Councilmember Ross just brought up, which is the view of the opt-in, that businesses will have a much smaller target market to which to advertise themselves to. So that's actually a great point. And valid reason. My driveway, I have a sewer grate right in front, not sewer, excuse me, the sewer. So anything that gets washed down ends up right there. And that's a problem. But I think the biggest thing for me is the safety element. Because if you go out and look at flyers on doors and crime, as just a general Google, what you'll find is a litany of information, and everybody talks about this as being one of the things. There's a top 10 list, and number 8 on the top 10 list is these very flyers hanging on doors. That in some events, it may be a very good company, a reputable company that's walking around and actually trying to solicit our residents. In other instances, it can be, a nefarious person putting one there just to see if you're home. But why invite crimes of opportunity for our residents? So I think the other thing is if we're truly worried about complaints coming in, then it's a problem. And if people don't mind, then they won't complain. The frank matter is I see more people complaining on social media about solicitors going door to door, and they never have a solicitor badge, which they're not supposed to have. They never call the city to complain, I don't think. They're just going on a social media and complaining. So at any rate, I think it's a good opportunity, and as council, we always have the opportunity to fine tune this. Should we find that we've misstepped on this one a little bit? So anyway, I'm supportive of it, although I do think there's merit in what Councilmember Ross said on the fining. We need to go do a good job of alerting people, for one, that there's something out there, because God knows, it always seems to be pest control companies that elicit all the social media posting. But I think we need to do a good job of alerting folks that you're not allowed to do this. Otherwise, it would not be known to outside companies. Because for the most part, I don't think
We lost your sound, Deputy Mayor. Oh, now you're froze. Uh-oh. Well, she looks like she's praying or something. Yeah. Thank you. She looked like she was looking to the heavens. Okay. So.
I think we lost her, yeah.
We did, but it was a very angelic shot, you got to say.
I think I'm back. I don't know how much.
Okay, so
Okay, good.
when she comes back, we'll put her back in. Oh, she's back? Deputy Mayor, are you back with us? Okay, she tried. Okay, so Lisa, are you still on the line?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so I'm gonna, from what I just want to go review what I think this does and what I think it doesn't do, and you can tell me if I'm right. What this does not do is it doesn't say that you have to put something in somebody's hands at the door. What it does say is you just can't dump in somebody's driveway. It says use the extra energy and take it to somebody's door. Don't litter on the driveway. Am I correct?
That's correct. That's correct. So prior to COVID, your FedEx delivery person, UPS delivery person knocks on the door and hands you something.
Okay. So it doesn't say you can't take literature out. It doesn't say you have to give it to somebody's hand. It just says don't just drop it in their driveway. Use the extra energy and be polite and take it to their door. So many neighborhoods, mine included, many years ago already passed something like this because of the very reason that we had a house in our neighborhood, actually right up the hill from us, that they had a bunch of stuff they were gone, and they were only gone for the weekend. And as it turned out, they had junk in that was in their driveways that had, a couple papers and some flyers and stuff, but their house was broken into. And one of the things that was said to them was, you know what, if you've got stuff that's in your driveway, that's going to be a red flag for people. So I do look at this as a security ordinance. So that's how I look at it. And, I can tell you other subdivisions because when our subdivision looked at it, they went to other subdivisions that have the same rules. So Sahalee has something like this, Rock Meadow has something like this. So, and that's why you see a lot of the subdivisions that have got the wooden boxes underneath them, underneath the mailboxes. So, you've got many, many subdivisions out there that have the wooden boxes and don't allow for you to do this anyway. So what this does do is it controls the litter. It controls the stuff just being dumped at the end of the driveway, in particular during holiday season when you've got people that go out of town. You don't want to draw attention to their driveway and people not going in and out, especially when you've got boxes and stuff being taken more often. So I look at it a little bit more of a safety ordinance. So when I read it, it read to me that way. And so as far as opting in or opting out, it seemed crazy to me that we would ask somebody to opt in for their safety. It's kind of like, no, they should be safe. You don't ask somebody to opt in to be safe. So that's how I looked at it. So anyway, but I do agree with the fact that the fines, you know what? The fine is, I would think that, a slap on the hand the first time would be very nice versus if somebody's going out there and I'm looking at, people that are going to go out there and put out flyers for their favorite candidate for, whatever coming up here in November. And, we can't be fining them per piece that they put out on a first offense because they didn't know. So I do think that a slap on the hands versus a, COVID, Merry Christmas, here's $5,000 fine you have. I do think that we need to analyze that a little bit different and perhaps look at the first fine as, okay, now and, you need to do that a little bit different. Okay, so do I have that all right? Am I right in the fact that it's really security and you can't dump stuff and it's really about, take the stuff just to the door? You don't have to connect with somebody?
Yeah. And Mayor, if I could just make one remark, it might help the conversation about penalties. And having worked with code enforcement officers for years and years, it's clear that no code enforcement officer, for example, someone has a junk vehicle in their yard, the code enforcement officer doesn't walk up to the owner of the junk vehicle and give them a $250 fine. They knock on the door, say, did you know that we have a code that prevents this? And then later, if it's apparent to the code enforcement officer that the violator is simply refusing to comply, then the penalties kick in. When you legislate that into your document, it kind of removes some of the flexibility that the code enforcement officer has. You can do it. You can say first offense shall be a warning. Second offense will be a warning plus $100. The third will be, $250 or $500 per every violation. But the practical truth of the matter is the code enforcement officer is already doing that. With respect to a lot of different code violations. So I don't particularly think it's necessary to draft it that way here unless you feel very, very strongly that it needs to be articulated.
Okay. All right. We've got our deputy mayor back, so we're going to put her back up. Deputy Mayor?
Actually, Lisa just answered the question, and I have no idea if you were able to hear anything I said in the first round.
No. Sorry,
No?
we weren't.
We got
No
part of
word.
it.
Okay, yeah, I'm having some confusion. Okay. My notes are over on my iPad over here. I'm trying to move just so that I can stay connected here. But I think I covered the whole plastic issue. I think my main concern is the safety one, frankly. I think the mayor actually said it best. We shouldn't have to have our residents opt in for safety. If you go and Google flyers and crime, those two terms together, you'll find a litany of information on the website that says flyers on doors leads to crime, or can, right? If you have leaflets that are left there, that can be an indication you're not home. And oftentimes people will leave things, door hangers on your door just to see if you're not home. So at any rate, I really think it is a good opportunity for us to kind of curb potential crime. And whenever we're, providing an additional layer of safety potentially for our residents, I think that's a good thing.
Okay, so then we have our very last, and it is Councilmember Treen.
Yeah, I just keep it short here, but I support it in full. I think we should adopt a new section of the Sammamish Municipal Code and prohibit the unsolicited distribution of leaflets and circulars. I think the fine should be, first offense should be about $100. Second offense should be $250 for $500 on a third, and it should be for all violations. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, was that a motion? Was that just your thoughts? Okay, so then we've got, so we've got one person online. Oh, I forgot about that. Sorry. I think that's Mary too, isn't it? Okay. We've got Mary Wichter online, and I apologize, Mary, we're going to put you into the hearing.
Okay, yes, Ms. Wichter, I will go ahead and unmute you. You have 3 minutes to provide comment.
Yes, thank you, Council. It's been a long time holding, but first of all, I wanted to say that the notice of consent where I have to do it with the penalty of perjury really doesn't appeal to me, and I don't know how many people would actually do that. I think what would be better is I believe the city keeps a list of licensed contractors, and if people want to get that list, they can. They can't get referral information, but they can do that. I think anybody who wants to have a business like a maid service, gardening, or whatever, they could be listed, and then people could get that because people are always asking for that stuff online, so I think that's a better way to do it. I also think that we don't need to have the ordinance because I looked up Ecology for Washington State has litter laws, L-I-T-T-E-R. Littering is punishable by fines ranging from $50 to $5,000. And the largest fines are for large items that can cause accidents and also for lit debris, which is primarily cigarettes. So they cover from small to large things that can cause accidents, including secured loads. So I think what you're talking about is general littering, and I think what Mr. Gamlin has given, Councilmember Gamlin has given as for stormwater, as you know, I'm Mary Stormwater Wichter, there is a lot of litter. When people put their trash out and they're recycling out, just about every week stuff is in the ditches. I pick it up regularly where I live. I know that we have adopt a litter control road people, and that's great, but I think littering in general really, really needs to be talked about in the city because that's way bigger than these little flyers are. For security, I would suggest that everybody who lives somewhere, you should meet a neighbor or have a phone call or a text so when you're not around, people can check your house. That's what we do in my neighborhood. And if you want to put something in specifically for fines in Sammamish Municipal Code, I believe it's 23100-10 assessment, -10 assessment schedule. It's got things in there at the bottom of the table. It says $25 fee per sign illegally placed on public property or in the city's right-of-way. So you could just add another thing there to actually have your fines if the littering ones didn't work for you. So I think between the littering fines, which already give the fines, they're statewide, and then you can choose to add something to the Sammamish Municipal Code that would do it. And I think that littering in general is way bigger. I've seen everything from Whole Foods litter to Wendy's to before we had a DQ, those litter, people throw them in the drainage ditches as they drive along. I think we need to have a lot bigger thing on why that's important. I know that plastics are bad, but I know there's a bunch of other things that are bad. And if you're down on East Lake Sammamish Parkway, where a lot of people have private driveways and the cans are up, get picked up on the public road, that those drainage ditches flow almost directly to a culvert, which goes either right to a stream and or Lake Sammamish. So I guess I would like to see that you don't do the ordinance, you use the existing litter laws. If you're going to burden the city's very lean organization to do things, that you would have it as a list of local businesses that or people that provide services in the area that people could use. And I recently saw from email there's a high volume of code compliance cases, so response times may be extended. I would rather have those important staff working on making sure trees aren't getting cut or building that is happening that is not following the design plans that are approved. That the staff
Mary, are your 3 minutes? If you want to finish up your thought.
I'm done. Code enforcement staff is super busy, so I think we need to have them focusing on trees and making sure buildings are getting done correctly because there's a lot of stop work notices. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for waiting. My apologies on that. Okay, so we are going to close the public hearing. So we'll close the public hearing on this, and then I need to, do I have a, okay. Councilmember Stewart, did you want, what was your clarification?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. Yeah, so Mayor, you asked a question and you said that this won't ban people from distributing literature. It just means that they have to put it on the porch. So I just wanted to get clarification because I understood that all commercial literature would be banned, that those things that were exempt, like political campaigns, were allowed, but those had to be attached to the door, and it specifically calls out with something like a rubber band, and it has to be protected from the elements. So I just want to get clarification. Are we saying that anybody can distribute flyers as long as they attach them to the door, or only the people who are exempted from this can attach something to the door?
Lisa, I'm going to have you answer
that, please.
So I'm looking at 545060 and section never mind. 050 number C. So 050C allows anything to be placed on premises if it's affixed, slipped, over a doorknob or other protrusion or placed through a slot. And so that section doesn't make a distinction between on the basis of content. And in fact, at the top, it says any literature exempted from this chapter shall only be distributed if. So let me back up. Any literature exempted from this chapter shall only be distributed if. And so when you take that section in conjunction with 060, anything listed in 060, if it's not placed in the hand of the recipient or in a mailbox or in another method listed there, it has to be affixed. So I guess another way to say that is...
Okay, so just to be clear, because... Go ahead.
I think I might have confused you, so, and that's my fault, I apologize. The exempt literature, so the literature that's delivered because it's been subscribed to or ordered or placed in the U.S. mail, or it's something that the individual resident wants, it has to be attached or placed in a hand or folded and boxed. It does not allow for the flyers and the advertising that people don't want to be acceptable if it's attached to a doorknob with a rubber band.
Okay, so just to make sure I can say it really simply, so all commercial literature is banned unless a person opts in, and then it has to be affixed to the door or delivered to the person's hand.
Yes. So what it's doing is leaving the throwing or, dropping of literature that meets the definition in this ordinance on someone's, front yard or their sidewalk or the driveway. It prohibits that.
Right, and that I'm fine with if we still allowed everybody to deliver flyers. But again, everything is banned unless you have an exemption here, and the exemptions are nonprofit organizations, a registered campaign committee, a federal, state, or local candidate, or a state or local initiative or referendum, provided said delivery complies with those provisions, which means it's affixed. So only those, or if someone has subscribed to it.
Correct. So it would not be okay. Just this is a ridiculous example, but suppose the post office, the federal post office, wants to deliver your mail by dropping it on your driveway or your front yard.
But I'm not talking about that.
Yeah,
that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, so I am the guy that comes around every year in the fall and puts on everybody's house the thing that says, I'm going to be in your neighborhood tomorrow, and I'm going to come and I'll clean your gutters and I'll aerate your lawn. And like half the neighborhood signs up because they come through and they do it all at once. That would be illegal. Even though it's affixed, it would be illegal because people didn't opt into that.
Correct.
Okay, so I just wanted to get that clarification. I also wanted to clarify for people when we're talking about fines, I just wanted to clarify that at $100 per offense with 500 flyers, that is a $50,000 fine, not a $5,000 fine. $50,000. So again, we're in the middle of an economic crisis where small businesses are disappearing daily. I am completely uncomfortable with something that would assess a $50,000 fine on a small business who's just trying to advertise to stay alive. And I just want to follow it up by saying that I appreciate all the talk about public safety, but the police chief was here and he said he is not aware that this is a problem, right? He said complaints, not aware that this is a problem. So I just want to clarify that. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Gamlin.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion, please, that the council adopts City of Sammamish Ordinance Number 02020, an ordinance of the City of Sammamish, Washington, adopting a new Chapter 5.45 to the Sammamish Municipal Code relating to the distribution of unsolicited or unsubscribed literature on private property, provided for severability, and establishing an effective date.
Second.
Okay. Oh, counts my question. Okay. Discussion? Any more discussion? Okay. Seeing none. Oh, Councilmember Stewart?
I'd like to, I think Councilmember Ritchie had a great idea, so I'd like to make an amendment that says that we limit this to plastics only. So there's no distribution of plastics or materials in plastics of any kind.
Second.
Okay, we have an amendment on the floor that with a first and a second. Any discussion on the amendment? Okay, hearing none.
I'll speak to it. I was going to speak to the amendment. So I think that it speaks to the environmental issues quite well. I think we all agree that plastics are bad, and the more we can eliminate plastics, the better. And then we can spend a little bit more time and not rush the rest of this. I think our city attorney pointed out that there's been no research done and there's no data behind any of this. And I think that we should do a little bit more digging. And I think Mary, in the public comment, brought up some really great points, that there's already a law in the books about litter, and maybe we can work to advertise that and work with our code enforcement to focus on that for the pieces of literature that we feel are causing litter issues, that we could use the existing and not create more and burden our code enforcement personnel. But let's get rid of the plastic. I'm all in.
Councilmember Gamblin.
Yeah, so I don't believe the amendment makes sense. It misses the entire safety viewpoint. So if somebody doesn't have to happen in a plastic bag, but they have put stuff in a rubber band or they wrap it in a rock or whatever, they still throw it in a driveway, we still have the security issue. But I'm not willing to put the security of our residents at risk. If anything goes in the driveway, it's a security risk. We risk the potential break-in and harm to our residents. It's unacceptable.
Councilmember Treen, then Councilmember Ritchie.
Yeah, I will not be supporting the amendment.
Councilmember Ritchie? Councilmember Ritchie?
So, I'm here. I'm just trying to. I'm trying to understand. Again, I appreciate the motion, and I think that the amendment makes. It seems to create an awareness of what we do know. We do know that plastics do cause some serious environmental problems. They do clog up our stormwater. I mean, that we know. I would think that if we're going to go as far as trying to look at what is a safety issue, then we should probably look at what else we put in our driveways, like our cars. I mean, if you park your car in your driveway, that's kind of an attractive nuisance for some theft, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to understand how we can ignore what the chief just said. Now, maybe we can consider, asking the chief to do some more digging and to provide some backing for this. I get that there may be some rationale. I'm looking for something to grab onto here, guys. I want to support this because I think a lot of it has merit. But when we just kind of go with the anecdotal and then the chief steps out and says that he doesn't have any evidence of this, then I would think it would make sense to table the motion, table the amendment, table the whole thing and say, let's go search for that anecdotal evidence. I support the idea behind the motion. I support the amendment because it has the data or the information behind it. So I'm not sure, why we can't just take steps, incremental steps, 3 yards in a cloud of dust and advance this thing slowly and then kind of build up as we go. And as we get more information, we attach something else onto it that's got data behind it. I support the idea. I just don't know why we can't just take a more, God forbid, an iterative step-by-step process, right? So thank you.
Well, I have to say, I wish I could have brought my neighbor and some of the folks from my neighborhood along who have had their house broken into, so. Okay, any other questions for the amendment? Okay, I need to see people so I can see hands up for the amendment or, okay. All right, all those in favor of the amendment, say aye. Oh,
Aye.
Aye.
okay, opposed? Nay.
Nay.
All right, so we've got a 5-2 on the amendment. Now we're going back to the original motion. Uh-oh, now we've got
I have another amendment.
Oh, we got another amendment. On the original motion?
So, yep.
Okay.
So based on the city attorney's recommendation, I say that if you're going to go forward with this, you remove the specificity of the graduated fines to allow the code enforcement officers to provide the warnings and their best judgment, as opposed to starting off with what could be upwards of a $50,000 fine for a first offense. So my amendment is to remove the specificity and the graduated fine, and I'll go so far as to say that the first that we also reduce the fine or change the fine that says for every distribution event there is a fine, as opposed to on a per flyer basis.
Lisa, can you answer to that? Because I thought you said it was already there, so maybe you can help me with the wording on that.
Correct. I didn't mean to imply that I advised to articulate that the code enforcement officer should have the discretion to issue a warning, because she already does. That's how business takes place currently. And I don't think it's a good idea to legislate something so specifically and precisely that she doesn't have some of the discretion she already can exercise.
Okay, so Councilmember Stewart, so that's already in, basically it's already there. So what was the rest of the part that the rest of the part was the fines.
It would be a $100 fine. It would be a fine per distribution event, not on a per flyer basis.
Okay, so state your motion so that I know exactly what you're stating.
So my motion is that the fine would be the $100 fine for a first event. A first offense would be for all things that were distributed in one event, as opposed to, again, in the example, if somebody went out and distributed 500 flyers at $100 per flyer, that is $50,000.
Okay, so are you?
That could kill a small business. So it would be $100 per sort of distribution event. So if I put out 500 flyers on one day, then that's $100.
Madam Mayor, we need a second to the amendment before we can have her speak to it. Thanks.
Okay, so let me see if I
seconded it.
Jason did seconded.
Okay, let me see if I have the amendment correct. Is that you want to change the amendment so that it is 100, and I don't want to get this wrong. It's not just the first time, that it is all times $100 per event.
No.
No. Okay, sorry.
No,
I need to restate it.
I want to change it so that it's, sure. The motion is that instead of on a per piece of literature basis, it's on a distribution event basis. So the example is the first offense is $100. It shouldn't be $100 per flyer. It should be $100 per, it's the Wednesday sale. And so I put out my flyers for my Wednesday sale. However many that is, I get a $100 fine. If I do it again, then I get whatever the second offense is, but I don't get it on a per flyer basis.
Okay, so a motion has been made and seconded, and then we have questions in the queue. Councilmember Ross.
Yeah, I guess I need Lisa to help clarify then. I thought as written in front of us that it does offer that flexibility and discretion. And the more specificity we get, the less discretion you have. So I'm thinking,
that's what I said.
and so I think if our goal is to achieve flexibility, not have the $50,000 fine scenario, as written, it gives us the flexibility to avoid that.
Yes, and that's the way all code enforcement matters, are processed. And to take it a step further, the person that receives the violation, suppose it is $50,000, that individual can dispute or file an appeal, go before the hearing examiner or district court, as the case may be, and ask that it be reduced. So it's not denying that person any procedural or substantive due process. And as I stated earlier, if somebody has a junk vehicle or more than one, typically people who have junk vehicles don't have just one. There are a lot of them. And there's a huge effort by code enforcement to try to bring that person into voluntary compliance rather than just walk up to the door or mail in a notice of violation with whatever fines attached.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Lisa. I really appreciate that. For that reason, I don't support the amendment. I think it gives us flexibility and it's not too onerous in the delivery of this ordinance.
Okay, Deputy Mayor.
Councilmember Ross took the words right out of my mouth. That's what I was going to say. The flexibility is already there.
Okay, Councilmember Stewart.
So whose discretion would it be? So the way it's written, the fine could be $50,000. Who gets to make that decision of it's just a warning or it's just $100 or it's $50,000? Who's making that call?
The code enforcement officer.
Okay, and how do we make sure that that's being applied the same across the board to all people?
Code enforcement doesn't work that way. Code enforcement, just by nature of how messy and disparate these different scenarios can be, it's a complaint-driven process. And the more recalcitrant and rigid the violator is in compliance, voluntary compliance, the harder the city will push back. And that won't be any different here.
Understood, but it's possible that they could levy the $50,000 fine on somebody, right? There's nothing stopping that from happening, correct?
The way that it's written, there's a theoretical possibility that somebody could receive a $50,000 fine. When we talked to the San Carlos, California city attorney, it was his experience that the widespread knowledge that this was on the books prevented the offense from happening at all.
Okay.
Okay, so Councilmember Stewart, were you the last one?
Yep.
Okay, so were you going to put a cap on the top of the amendment for dollar-wise? Want to repeat your amendment?
Sure. How about if we say that it should be on a per event basis with a, first offense cannot be in excess of $500. I mean, we're talking about small business. We're talking about people who are like mowing your lawns here or cleaning your houses. Like, why are we attacking these poor people?
Okay, so the amendment is made.
Actually, I don't want to change my amendment. No, I don't want to change my amendment. I had an amendment. We had a second. Let's go for it.
All right. All those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
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 All those opposed, say nay.
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 Okay.
Nay.
I'd like to make an amendment, and please don't get. I'd like to make an amendment. Sorry, it's just on the penalties end, that we just put that there won't ever be anything more than like a a $5,000 penalty or something. Absolutely.
I'd like to make a slightly different amendment, Mayor.
We're just.
Okay, so
I'll
no, I
second
didn't
the
put a
mayor's
second on
motion.
mine, so that's fine.
I'll second the mayor's motion.
Okay. And Councilmember Gamblin?
Yeah, so I think we've heard now from the city attorney 3 times stating how the law works, that you need that discretion built in, you need the flexibility built in. The more specifics you put on it, the harder it is to enforce. Let's just go with what we have. That's why we have a city attorney.
All right. Okay. All right. So, you know, I'm looking at it. I'm just going to, I'll pull my motion back.
Oh, no.
Okay. So, and we will go back to the original motion that's on the floor. And who made the motion? Please repeat your motion.
That the council passed the City of Sammamish, Washington ordinance number 02020.
Okay. And who was the second? Okay.
Councilmember Trine.
Councilmember Trine.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
5-2. All right. Moving on, we've got discussion on nonprofit. You know what? It is.
Mayor Murray, can we take a
9:30.
break?
Can we take a health and safety break and be back in a Sammamish 10? Well, Sammamish 5, which means 10. So back in, it is 9:38, so we'll be back at 9:50. Jason, are you with us?
Yep, I'm here. Thanks.
Okay, what do you think? Does it work for you to move the rules to the October meeting to just for the time's sake for tonight?
If it were up to me, we would move both of them to the October meeting, but, you know, because I don't think either one of them are time sensitive. Do you know what I mean?
Okay, both of what? So tell me which.
Well, the agenda items we've got left include the EFR COVID money thing, and then we've got the council rules thing, right? That's the 2 remaining things on the agenda, unless I skipped ahead somehow.
No, there's more.
We got
I would just Mayor, I would just recommend that we try to focus on what's time sensitive, and right now, neither one of those is time sensitive. It's, you know, going on 10 o'clock at night.
Yep.
And,
Okay, so we have closed the hearing that we had for ordinance number 02020-211. We are on unfinished business, so we've got the nonprofit grant funding. If we can move the rules of procedure to October, that would save us some time this evening. The CARES Act implementation, do we want to do that this evening or do we want to move that to October?
Mayor, the November 30 deadline, I think, is something we should take into consideration, but, you know, we've got time between now and then, right? That's all.
Let's ask our city manager.
Mayor, members of council, we've done a lot of due diligence on here, but some questions came up today that are concerning us as to timing and as to relevance on the position of the Department of Commerce, even though we have 2 correspondents from them being in supportive, as Councilmember Stewart has pointed out their matrix. It's somewhat contrary to the Treasury guideline. So we can take this back and take a close look at it, because we don't want to be wrong. And we want to make good, clear recommendations to the council. That being said, we can defer.
Okay, so if we moved, yes, I mean, if you could and bring something, you know, tell them if they could send us something that was certified.
Well, we're going
stamped in blood, maybe.
Yeah. I'll leave it to the council.
All right, never mind. That'd be great. Okay, so we could move those two off. That would be awesome. Okay, but that still leaves us with our nonprofit grant funding. Oh, thank you for staying, Aaron. Okay, so nonprofit grant funding, Mr. Sugg.
Good evening. Once again, Mike Sugg, Senior Management Analyst. I'm joined by Rita Bod, Senior Human Services Coordinator. During the Council's meeting on August 18th, staff presented second quarter reporting data from our grant-funded agencies, which showed that some organizations had seen changes in their service delivery, which may have been attributable to COVID-19. After seeing the data, Council suggested that staff reach out to some of these organizations to gather some specific information about their needs and come back with a potential funding recommendation for consideration. Rita held individual conversations with the leadership of 16 nonprofits that are providing critical services during the pandemic. These organizations have a proven track record of delivering services to our community and have been trusted city partners for many years. We talked with these providers about their current unfunded needs, as well as what additional services they might be able to offer residents if funding were available. After reviewing the discussion with each provider, staff developed a potential funding allocation, which is shown in your agenda bill, totaling $231,750. These providers cover a variety of areas, including seniors, mental health, eviction, rental assistance, food, domestic violence services, and other important areas. Some nonprofits had a more specific request than others. As an example, Youth Eastside Services had a list of items they needed to purchase to help with their transition to telehealth services, and other requests were a little bit more open-ended. For example, the rental assistance providers can generally make use, within reason, of whatever funding the city can provide. So there's some discretion on the amounts there. There was also a few needs that were related to new staffing positions at the nonprofits, which we haven't included here as those would require an ongoing funding source. Just want to mention also that some of the nonprofits we spoke with mentioned they were worried about the funding availability once the state's CARES Act deadline passes in November. The city manager was planning to speak to the CARES Act later in this meeting, but we'll come back with more information. One benefit of approaching it the way that was proposed in the packet, the CARES Act funding, would be that we would be able to distribute these grants to nonprofits without needing to adhere to the state's time limitations, thereby providing assistance during the winter when funding may be harder to come by for these nonprofits. So just wanted to mention that as well. So that's our brief report. We're happy to speak to any of the organizations listed on the agenda bill there, and I will go ahead and turn it back over to the mayor if there are any questions or discussion.
Okay, I know we're going to have a whole bunch of these, so I think we might end up doing it just a round robin on this one. Okay, so I think we're just going to start a round robin. And if I can find my paper, which is here somewhere. Okay, I think what we will do, let's start a round robin because I know everybody's going to have a lot of questions on this. Let's start with Deputy Mayor.
I don't know if I have any questions right now. I'll circle back to me.
Okay, yeah, if you don't have any questions, just say pass. That's fine. Okay, Councilmember Gamblin.
Yeah, I'll pass for until the next time. Thanks.
Okay, Councilmember Ritchie.
Yeah, I think I'm good on this. I'll pass, surprisingly.
Wow, this is Councilmember Ross.
Maybe just quickly, if Mike and Rita can go through the process of making these determinations, that'll be helpful.
Sure, Mike, do you want me to speak to that?
Please.
Yeah, sure. So basically, we spoke to 16 providers that we felt really were providing specific services to the residents of Sammamish. We had like three main leading questions that we kind of like asked them. The first was, do you have a need that you are unable to fulfill due to lack of finances? So essentially an unfunded need that isn't covered by existing grants. The second one was, do you have any outstanding COVID-19 expenses? And lastly, are there any additional programs or services that you could potentially offer if you had more funding? So that was really those questions that just we were able to get a lot of information from that and have conversation around that.
Okay, so the magnitude of the grants recommendations will not exceed their need. You aligned that with them. That's what it sounds like. So.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah, I'm just going to move that we pass this as written. That we pass the grant allocations as listed in the agenda bill.
Second.
Okay, I'm going to finish our round robin though, so that we can, okay. Councilmember Treen?
Should I just make the motion? No. Just
Everybody else
Pam,
is.
good job. I'm with you there 100%. I wish I could have jumped in on the second there. So yeah, let's roll forward with these 14 organizations and a total of $231,750 as listed. I believe there's all 14 of them there listed for us. So thanks, Mike and Rita, for all the work you guys put to this. Really appreciate it. Thanks.
I do want to give accolades to Mike and Rita on this, and I did have an opportunity. We got an email that regarding St. Vincent, and so I reached out to them, and I have to say they were they were upset about the email we had received, but they wanted me to make sure that I let you both know that they were very appreciative for everything that you guys do, that they feel you go above and beyond. And so I wanted the council to know that HopeLink, Issaquah Food and Clothing Bank, and St. Vincent de Paul, the three of them said that between you and Rita, they hear from you, whether it be in person, one or the other, or an email. They feel like you guys do a great job of making sure you're on top of things and checking in with them, weekly or every other week and checking in to make sure. I mean, they feel like Sammamish is there and covering very well. So St. Vinny's was worried that they would have any sort of problem with the city, and I told them absolutely not, that we love working with them, but they wanted to make sure that you both knew that they were very appreciative of both of you.
Thank you, Mayor. That's very kind of you to mention. And I will just give all the credit there to Rita. She's fantastic at building relationships with our providers.
Well, then,
and,
Rita, I hope you heard that.
Checking up with them.
That's very kind. Thank you.
Okay, so.
Move to extend.
Okay, pardon me?
Move to extend to 10:15.
Oop, okay. Yes, do we have a second?
Second.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Okay. All right, so we've got a motion and a second on the floor to approve as written and suggested from our staff for the human services grants. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Excellent. Okay, we moved on. The next we have is got the small business recovery grants. And that is Mr. Sugg.
Thank you once again, Mike Suggs, Senior Management Analyst. Just a quick intro here. This agenda item provides an opportunity to discuss the possibility of opening up a second round of small business grant funding. The council approved the distribution of the first round of funding on September 1st, and staff have notified the 42 eligible applicants and are currently working on the grant agreement, which we hope to send out later this week or early next week for signing. In tonight's agenda bill, there is some information about how the first round of funding was set up, including eligibility criteria, the application itself, and some information about how it was promoted. If a second round is something the council wants to entertain, any of these elements of the first round could be modified if the council desires. For example, increasing the number of FTEs a business can have and still be eligible was something I believe I saw another city did when they opened up their second round. So again, just open for discussion or any questions that you might have. And I will go ahead and turn it back over to the mayor.
Okay, since we've been through this just a bunch of times, I'm going to, all right, just take questions from there. So I'm going to start, I believe it is with Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I'm trying to unmute myself here. So yeah, I'm supportive of doing a second round here. However, I am interested, I was talking to the mayor and she can speak to this more about, Redmond's program and how originally when this came to us, I was somewhat reticent because we weren't cross-checking anything relative to the businesses that were applying. And thereby, we have no idea if the grants we've given are to businesses that truly need or don't, because we haven't put any bookends on that. As a business owner myself and as someone who's gone through the SBA, a PPP loan, it is singled with requirements to demonstrate the need. And then on the flip side is to prove that you spent those funds the way that they were intended. And so I guess I'd like to see us put a little bit more into this because originally this council approved $250,000 and then went to $420,000. And to be, making sure that we are good stewards of those dollars that have come to us to give them out to businesses. I want to make sure we're giving them to businesses that need them. I do think there is the flip side of this too, which is the nonprofits. I do think we might want to entertain that. I don't know if those parameters should look different. And I don't know if you bifurcate it based on a timeline. I know I received an email today, and I suspect the rest of the council did too, from a local business. So there are businesses out there that, weren't aware or found out too late on the first round. So they do want to have the opportunity to apply. And I don't want to deny them that, especially if they could use help in that funding. But I really feel pretty adamant about the fact that we need to make businesses prove that they need this money. Because the way we've got it set up right now, nobody has to prove that they need the money. And I don't think that's a good way to dole out taxpayer funds. And then on the nonprofit side, there are a lot of good nonprofits in our community that are doing good work that aren't able to operate right now because of COVID. And they are impacted as well. And I do think there's some merit to adding in a layer for the nonprofits. But I do think we need to do a fine balancing act with making sure that we're not having businesses double dipping, and having a loan coming back for a second loan. So I just think we need to put some bookends on this. But I am certainly supportive of doing a second round of loans and for the nonprofit side of it as well.
Councilmember Treen.
Yeah, I just say that we definitely should move forward on doing a second round of grants. And I think to hit a wider, go to 25 FTEs. I think we should keep the same as far as $1,000 minimum, 10,000 max. And sure, yeah. Councilmember, Deputy Mayor Malchow's got a good point, show the need and let us know how you spent it. That'd be really nice. Thanks.
Councilmember Stewart?
Yeah, I'm definitely in favor of doing another round, and I'm definitely in favor of offering we don't qualify for any of our other kinds of grants, but that need help getting through COVID. And while when we first went after this or set up the first round, I was all in favor of the whole, show the need and prove the need. But I think we got some pretty strong feedback from the city manager and the city manager's office that came with a host of challenges. And so that's why the program is set up this way. So maybe we can make a motion. Maybe we can make a motion that says we should go ahead and move forward with another round and include and ask staff to come back with a recommendation on what those parameters would be.
Can you have a sheet?
Sorry, Christy's saying she can't hear me. Can other people hear me?
You sound very, very muffled.
Very muffled. Okay. Is that better?
No.
No? All right, let's try to.
You have a real strong background noise,
Oh,
almost like a squeaky horn.
Yeah, I think it's better without the earphones. You need to restate your motion, Pam. I have no idea what you said.
Sure. So my motion, can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah, much better.
Okay, great. Okay, so my motion is that I move that we direct staff to come back with a second round for the small business with recommendations if we can tighten up any of those requirements, and also a way to include nonprofits, or if that needs to be a separate program altogether. And just as a commentary on that, so I move that we direct staff to go do that and bring that back to us.
Second.
Okay, I want to finish our round robin on this before we go too far, because we've got.
Yeah, and the only comment that I'd like to make in terms of things I think we can improve is I definitely think we need to improve our communication for this. I do think that there were a lot of businesses that didn't know about it or didn't find out about it until after the fact.
Okay, I know that in walking around in the different shopping centers, that the shopping centers, they seem to know. So if it was a problem, it's going to be in the home businesses. And that would be in mailing, making sure that if we get it into the newsletter, make sure we get it out in time. Okay, so next up is Deputy Mayor, did you speak? Yes, you did. Yeah. Okay, so behind Deputy Mayor, Councilmember Gamblin.
Yeah, so looking at the information here, Mike, that you gave us, did we mail to the business license list?
During the first round of grants, we did not mail to the business list. One of the challenges of getting the licensee information from the Department of Revenue is that you can't use their personal information. So, for example, we can't use their email address or things like that. So if we did want to mail it to businesses, it'd have to be through snail mail, which is something I've included here as a consideration, that we could do that snail mail notification to, I think we have somewhere in the range of 2,600 businesses in Sammamish.
If one of the parameters, the main parameters is having a business license, then it would seem mailing the business license list would automatically assure that we're reaching our target audience, right? So anyway, just a suggestion. And could you clarify it? It says the city could mail notification to business owners that have a Sammamish endorsement. What does Sammamish endorsement mean?
So they have their business license through the state, but then they get their Sammamish business license, which I think is technically, Lita can correct me if I'm wrong, called a Sammamish endorsement to that
So
business
you're
license.
already suggesting what I just suggested.
As a consideration.
Okay. Question, sorry about that. Yeah, I should have known you beat me to it. Question for the city manager. There's some questions coming up from the deputy mayor and others about showing some qualifications pre and post on the CARES Act dollars. Did you mention that there was some limitation with what we can do in qualifications or having reporting back to the city on the use of these CARES Act dollars?
Mayor, members of council, Councilman Gamlin, what we had originally looked at was the criteria of pre-qualifying persons, and then the issue of subrecipient grants if we gave that and we had to do the follow-up. So we'll look at that a little bit more. I'm working with Mike on those parameters to make sure we're more clear, go back and take a look at it. But we were trying to stay away from looking like we were doing subrecipient grants. That is, giving them the money and then having them validate on the expenditures. But I understand where the deputy mayor is coming from, but that can be more problematic when it comes to the federal single audit issues. So we need to be more specific in the application process. So we thought we were hitting on that, but we'll go back and take a look.
Okay,
In our recommendations, we'll bring all that back to you.
Okay, so I agree with the deputy mayor. I just want to balance that out with making sure we obviously stay within the parameters of the act.
Yes, and our ability to responsively, not responsibly, but be responsive and get it done as timely as we can so that we can be effective to getting the grants out and our documentation completed for the new parameters of November 30th to complete the documentation, and then by December 15th to get it submitted.
Okay. Yeah, and this is just important stuff. These are
Motion to extend to 10:30. Sorry, we got to move to extend to 10:30.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed?
Okay, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go down so we can finish this round robin. Councilmember Ritchie, do you have any input?
No, I'm pretty comfortable with everything that's been said. Let's go ahead.
Okay, Councilmember Ross.
Yeah, I definitely think we need to make sure we have criteria, more definitive criteria. What concerns me in particular is we gave $10,000 grants, and I'm not sure all of those businesses may be able to justify $10,000 worth COVID-related expenditures. That may be a struggle for some of the businesses. So as part of our process, I'd recommend that we have a data feedback mechanism so that for the businesses that may gain a second round funding, that they are able to document that they were able to support the first $10,000. So something of that nature needs to be evaluated. So we don't want to be compounding the problem of justifying COVID-related expenses in that kind of like a So something to look at as we review it, please, Dave and team.
Okay, and then do you have anything else, Councilmember?
No, I support the motion. I just want to add some more clarity and then make sure we include Deputy Mayor's point of some bookends in there.
Okay, so our business is in Redmond, and so I find it interesting to keep hearing about Redmond does this and Redmond does that, because our business is in Redmond, and they just now are doing their grants for small businesses. It closes next week. So I just find it really interesting that, they've done this, and it's like, no, they haven't. They just allocated the money. They hadn't done it. So they now are doing their grant stuff. It closes next week. And what I find interesting is it wasn't a who are you, I am fine sort of thing. It wasn't like 5 questions. It was a long worksheet of stuff to do. And so I was very surprised by that. Also, they notified us by email. And so I would like to know, maybe we can check into a little bit of how they're able to do that. Is it because, we pay our head tax to Redmond? I mean, I don't know why, but I mean, we were notified by them via email. And then I can give you the packet because it was, an 8-page packet of what we had to fill in. So it was not an easy just give me money. You had to show the need You had to show that the money lost from, second quarter of last year to second quarter of this year. You had to show, and then you had to show what your proposed budget was for the next year. So it was very time consuming and interesting. So in that being said, and going forward into the second process, into the second round, one of the things I learned in their worksheet was we're going to have businesses that we did give money to in the first round that perhaps we're going to have to look at if they apply for the second round. We're going to have to look at a little bit different because we're going to have to look at, yes, you can apply again, but you're going to have to show expenses, that you have expenses over that $10,000 because they have to have needed over that $10,000. So we can't just give them the money because I wish I could write them all a $20,000 check, but it doesn't work that way. And so I can show you kind of some of the worksheets that, Redmond used in that so that, because we have to show that it's there and the need that they had to use. And then the other thing was we have to make sure that anybody who was in that first round, they have to show, that one, they've got more of a need than that. And that we only pay that amount over. So if we come back and say, okay, everybody's going to get $6,000, but these guys only had another $3,000 in need, then that's all they can get. And so I'm going to suggest that with this, that to prepare, for this motion and to prepare for whatever, is that you put a couple of people to work with you on this, maybe, Christy and myself, or Christy and Chris Ross, or, the three of us, or whatever you'd like, but to work with you on this, to put the information together that's going to be needed. And, I can help you from the Redmond standpoint of what you're going to need to bring back to council so that we know what the second round is going to look like. Because I'd like to see it.
Mayor, why wouldn't we use the same folks that worked on round one?
Yeah, but we're going to have the extra stuff that for those businesses that were in round one.
No, I'm saying the same people work on it that we did for round one.
I certainly wouldn't mind being involved as a small business owner and someone who's gone through the SBA PPP loan. I think I can bring a lot of information to the table on this one.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So, yeah. So, if you want to do that, even if it's those three, and I can give you my road stuff, make it, whatever works. Okay. All right, so that being said, we are back to the last person in the round robin, which is Mr. Treen. Oh, you've spoken. Okay.
I spoke. I'm in agreement. It's looking good.
Perfect. Okay,
Thanks.
thank you. Okay, so we have got a motion on the floor, and we have a second on that motion. Is there any more discussion?
Yep, I'm in the queue.
Oh, okay. Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, so I think the language on the motion is just a little too loose for my preference. It's the non-definitive about having some parameters around. I can't remember exactly what Councilmember Stewart stated, but it's something like, "Let's go do this and then see if there's something we can do." We know there's something we can do. Redmond's doing it, so I think we need to put bookends on this so that we are giving money to businesses that need money. And so I will die on that hill. I think it's really important that we're giving it to businesses that need it.
I'll restate my motion if you like. My motion was to direct the staff to come back with recommendations, because if you recall the last time around, we had put together a little committee and we came in with recommendations, and the staff came back and said, for all these reasons, we want to strip them out. So I think we need the city manager and Mike and those guys to come back to us. I don't think anyone's in disagreement, but I think we need that input from the city manager and his staff to let us know what they think we can legitimately put back in, because we all agreed to strip it out based on their recommendations last time. So I don't think anybody's disagreeing with you, Christy. I think we're leaving it loose to allow, I think staff understands what we're asking for, and they need to go figure out how to make that happen, and we need their recommendation on that.
Yeah, so as long as we have another touch point on there, because there was, somebody said something about going up to 25 employees, and I think that opens up a whole other can of worms. So
I think that's one of the things that would go to this little committee to look at.
I agree. I think if we're sending it off to staff to go look at, that committee needs to be involved with that too. That'll save us a council meeting on the back end.
Makes sense.
So can you add that to your motion, or you want me to make that amendment?
Sure, I can add that. So I will modify my motion to say that we will take the small business grant, the small business and non-for-profit grant committee, and staff will go off and come back with a recommendation at the next council meeting. That's what I move we do.
I will second that.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, got a 7-0. And so I want to make sure that Mike has the people on the little committee who is on that. That is going to be Christy and Pam and Chris Ross and myself.
That can't be. That's a committee of 4, and that's
okay.
one
Well,
committee.
I'll be the fill-in person to just give you, stuff that you need and that sort of thing. Okay, council. Let me look at the list. We have got Deputy Mayor. Your report.
Yep. Yeah, let me scroll on my packet here. Now it won't open my report, and I feel like there's something in there that we need to talk about. But
you have the HB 1590, and I wanted to ask you about that because you said that the county is having discussions about implementing it, which would force our hand, and I wanted you to explain what you mean by forcing our hand. I mean, they're looking to raise money for affordable housing, correct?
yes, but there's a difference, and I think staff would be better charged with answering this question because there's two ways that this goes. When I say forcing our hand, it's about who is taking the tax and how much we get, and if we are going to get it back from the county or whether we're going to implement it ourselves and have it firsthand. So there is a difference. But my packet, it won't open, so I can't even read what I said there. But I don't know that I tracked on what the county council did or didn't do. No, they haven't done anything yet. So what I last heard in our meeting with Dow Constantine was that the county council hadn't asked for it yet, but he assumed that they would, so he was going to bring it to them, and but probably not by the deadline, which is at the end of this month. And the deadline is what determines who, if the county goes and does it before the deadline, then we would have to take action as a council in order to be able to get the taxes and not have to get them back from the county, the money. But I don't think they're going to do it before the 30th of September. But if they do it before we do, it may require action on our council's part. So that's the force our hand part, is action on our part versus non-action. So the long and short of having it in there is staff needs to review it and understand what's going on at the county level and how it impacts us. Does that make sense?
So that would be a David Pyle question, and I don't know if he's even still on the line.
I think it's maybe a Mike Sugg question.
That might be a who? Mike Sugg question?
I think staff probably needs to be on top of this.
Okay.
Deputy Mayor, can you just make sure that it's sent over to my office? I don't recall seeing the information.
Well, it's in my council report. It's in my council report, so it's in the packet.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So House Bill 1590 was passed by the legislature, and it is a 0.1% sales tax for affordable housing. And there's some parameters, and the county's looking at dialing those. You know, like I think part of it is 30% or so has to be used in your jurisdiction. Well, if you do the math on that, that equates to an ADU in someone's backyard. I mean, it doesn't buy Sammamish a whole lot based on our sales tax revenue. So and you can't use it for that. It can't be used for a single family house. So the timeline will be important to us over, you know, how long do we have to, you know, take in the sales tax? At what point do we have to actually construct something? Because we're not building anything for $275,000, which is what I think we calculated out Sammamish would get. So, but the county versus the city implementing the tax first has implications on how we get the money. And so that's why I just wanted staff to be aware of what the county was doing in that timeline.
And of course, they want to implement this during COVID.
That was another discussion that we had. That was not, you know, anything that's tax related right now in the middle of COVID is causing some consternation amongst SCA cities.
Okay, thank you.
Even though it's a novel concept, it's just right now.
Okay. All right, so the next thing on here would be executive session. So we are going to have to extend for executive session before we even go in. Okay, so we don't have to do this again. Let's just extend for half an hour. Executive session, I think, will take, what, 15 minutes, 15 to 20? So let's extend for half an hour.
Are we expecting action?
I don't know either.
Move to extend to 11.
Okay.
Second. Don't we need to, don't we need to come back?
Wait a second, because if we are not, there's something we are expecting. Okay.
So we have to extend the
We're
meeting
just extending the meeting right now, which is separate from.
We'll get us back to executive session properly. So right now we're moved to extend to 11.
I'm saying don't we need to then wait till 11 o'clock, even if we finish in 15 minutes?
Exactly.
If we're expecting action?
No, this is separate, Jason.
No, we do not.
Oh,
This is just extending the meeting, which is separate from how long the mayor will state the executive session will take.
Gotcha.
Okay. So extending the meeting till 11. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Nay?
Nay.
Okay, we got one grouchy old nay. Okay, 6-1. Okay, so we are going to head back for executive session. Folks, plug into your executive session. We will see you there.
Oh, Karen, Mayor?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Mayor. Are you still there? I think this is where Jason's question is pertinent, which is if we expect action, can we be pretty precise as to what time we're going to return?
I don't see anything from Jeff, and I don't see him here. Okay, so let me read this. Okay. Oh. Okay. I'm going to say yes to this because we are going to go into executive session for potential land acquisition pursuant to RCW 42.30.1101B. Possibly. So my guess is executive session for, he's saying 15 to 20 minutes. And yes, there will probably be action.
Action.
Okay. Yes, here we go. Yes, he will be seeking action. Okay, we will see you in the other side. Okay, this is an extension of meeting Tuesday, September 15th, 2020, extending our executive session from 11 p.m. to 11:15. Check, check.
Move to adjourn now?
Move to adjourn. Oh, wait, we gotta wait. We don't have our cameraman back.
Kent, it's too late. Kent, it's too late. You've been in the room with them all this time. Putting the mask on now doesn't do any good. It's too late. It doesn't work that way.
Okay, we're waiting for our cameraman. Works for you. All right. Is he ready? Okay, we're ready. Okay.
Now I move to adjourn.
All right. Second? All in favor?
Second, whatever. Go.
All right. All right, you
Yes.
guys. Have a nice couple of weeks.
Good night.